New houses can be haunted, too. Here's my story. I remember the day, not too long ago, that I stood in front of my brand new home. After the year-long headache of the over-budget and over-delayed build process, I finally held the keys to the castle of my 11.4-acre kingdom. The exhaust note from the contractor's truck finally faded, leaving only the shrill whoosh of the wind blowing against the structure. The Rambler stood broad and strong under the increasingly low and dark clouds that promised a chilly fall storm. The exterior was fashioned of white brick and white wood paneling, designed to appear in a sort of rustic barn styling. Front and center was a light brown double door made from pine with 3 matching pillars on each side to support the covered front porch. The garage was facing the side. I had seen the house several times during the build process, but now that it was complete, it felt different. The house appeared ominous against the daunting clouds of the incoming storm. The yellowing grass from the sod that was planted too late in the season to properly root, along with the various shades of brown of the fields behind the house, added to the effect. Lightning struck in the distance behind the house, as if the scene was posing for a perfect photo shoot. Although it was brand new, the house had a noticeable essence, in the sort of way that a historical relic, older than any person alive, makes you wonder about the events said relic has seen. If a house could have an old soul, this house had one. It was designed to appear rustic, of course, but there was something special that I just couldn't quite put my finger on. A gust of cold wind reminded me that I had little time before the storm would unleash pounding rain and violent wind. I took a deep breath as I walked in, inhaling the smell of fresh paint and carpet. My paint and my carpet. With each step, my boots echoed through the open living area's bare walls, hardwood floors, and vaulted ceiling. When I had previously been inside the home, it was busy with workers and conversation. Now that it was empty, though, my 3,250 square feet felt oddly large to the point of being nearly lonely. For the past year, I'd been living in a cozy fifth-wheel camper while waiting for the construction to finish. As I wandered through my new home, it crossed my mind that maybe it was a bit excessive for a single 29-year-old after all. Still, I had no regrets about it. I walked through the master bedroom first, admiring the luxury of space I'd have. The California king bed I ordered would easily fit, with plenty of room to spare. Hell, the closet was roughly the size of my bedroom growing up. I strolled through the rest of the house, realizing that I had underestimated just how much furniture I would need to fill the large open spaces of the house. It was overwhelming to think of all the furniture it would take, so I decided an interior designer would be the best option. After locking the door behind me, I took one last look at the house. My house. I finally allowed myself to smile at my new symbol of success. That's what the house truly was, whether I wanted to admit it to myself or not. I didn't need all that space. I wanted to stick it to those who doubted me, underestimated me, and looked down upon me. I wanted a place to set down roots, maybe a place for a family one day. But my middle finger played a big part in my decisions. My furniture was set to arrive in 10 days. Until then, it was back to the camper before the storm hit. If only I knew the real storm that was on its way, I'd have turned away and never gone back. 1 week later. Moving in honestly wasn't much of a move. The furniture company delivered everything and arranged the house to the orders of my attractive interior designer, Rachel. Everything else that I owned, I simply carried out of my camper and into the house. Rachel was unpacking all of the kitchenware she purchased on my behalf and rolled her eyes at me when I set my coffee maker on the counter. Nope, hide that away. You can't have a red coffee maker when all of the appliances are stainless steel. Why not? I asked. Because it's hideous, she said, throwing her arms above her head with a laugh. This is why you're single. she said in a way that wasn't insulting, but perhaps slightly flirtatious. Or maybe it's because I like choosing my coffee maker. I fired back, sharing her playful tone. Yet, here you are, hiring a woman to pick out everything in your entire house, she said with a cute wink. Can't argue that, I chuckled. First time I've ever paid someone to spend my money for me. How much do I owe you anyway? Oh, we can discuss it over dinner, she said casually as if we had planned such an event. Dinner? Well, yeah, she said, taking a step closer. You have me working on a Friday evening. That's serious overtime right there. All right, let's go. Steak? I asked, testing to see how serious she was. I was thinking Italian, she said with a smile. I know an adorable place out by the lake. Sounds expensive. Overtime ain't cheap, cutie. You're driving, she said, already walking toward the front door. Well, I'll be damned, I thought. Got a date with a beautiful woman and didn't even have to come up with a shitty pickup line. Life was turning out all right after all. We hopped in my truck and started driving off, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw something out of place. A child, staring out from a window on the main floor. I hit the brakes and turned my full attention to the window, where there was no longer a child, but the drapes were swaying slightly as they had just been moved. Are you okay? Rachel asked, staring at me intently. Yeah, I just thought I saw a coyote is all. I lied, not wanting to look like an idiot on our date. Yeah, you'll be seeing a few of those in this neck of the woods, she said with another soft laugh. With that, I put the child out of my thoughts, my foot on the gas, and started driving. Later that evening. The evening was wonderful, one of the best nights I'd had in a long time. The last decade of my life had been consumed by working and saving. Long, grueling days in remote locations left little time for romance, but that's where the money was, and money was the goal. I hadn't spent much time worrying about finding a partner, but after that date, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe I'd found her anyway. I hoped she felt the same. We'd just met, of course, and had only one date, but I was smitten. I reasoned with myself that I was setting down roots anyhow. I had my welding business, which was going great, a reasonable work-life schedule, and finally my house. Maybe having someone to share it all with wouldn't be so bad. I was just drifting off to sleep. Thoughts of Rachel on my mind when the pitter-patter of bare feet hitting the hardwood floors resonated throughout the house. I sat up in bed, quickly putting my feet on the carpeted floor and froze, listening intently and wondering if I'd really heard that. Nothing but the silence was audible. I took a deep breath to calm my heart rate, told myself I must have dreamed it, and started to lay back down. The pitter-patter came again, unmistakably the sound of quick footsteps running through my hallway, right past my bedroom door. My heart rate skyrocketed as I lurched out of bed, grabbed the pistol from my nightstand drawer, and rushed out the door ready to confront an intruder. I turned the flashlight attachment on which illuminated the hallway in the direction the footsteps ran toward, but there was nothing but a wall in that direction. I turned the light in the other direction toward the living area, walking down the hallway with the pistol held in front of me. "Who's there?" I yelled, unsure of what to do. I flipped the lights on as I entered the open living area, revealing that, like the hallway, it remained empty. I continued through the main level of the house, flipping on every light as I went through. Then I did the same with the basement, which was also empty. The last room in the basement was the laundry room. It was large for a laundry room, but designed to double as a storage area. For now, the mounted shelves stood empty, leaving the stainless steel washer and dryer as the only things in the room. I had cheaped out on this room, and instead of tile, I had ordered pergo flooring to be installed. Still, the soft gray flooring matched the rest of the house. The room was empty, but as I turned to walk out, The light flickered, then went out entirely. Nope, I thought to myself. The thing with the lights was too weird. I turned to walk out, but as I did so, I felt a tingle on the back of my neck, as if someone was right behind me, breathing on my neck and waiting to lurch. I felt goosebumps grow on the back of my neck from a cold puff of air that touched my neck, as if someone's icy breath had just touched me. I gathered my guts and span around, half expecting to be greeted by somebody or something, despite knowing that the room was empty. The room was indeed still empty, but that did little to calm the feeling of being stalked. I turned and sprinted back up the stairs 2 at a time. I locked my bedroom door and sat propped up on my bed, leaving my bedroom lights on. My breathing was heavy and chest tight as I tried desperately to make sense of it all, telling myself that I had imagined it. I dreamed it. I definitely heard something, but it definitely wasn't real. Did it sound childlike? Raccoons. It had to be raccoons. They must have nested somewhere before all the doors and windows were in place, right? I pulled the covers over my head, like a child afraid of the boogeyman. The following day, I woke up Saturday morning with the sun already blasting the large eastward-facing bedroom windows. The bedroom lights were still on, and I was shocked to feel the weight of my pistol still in my hand. I cursed myself for having been so scared, so damn stupid, as to drift off to sleep with a loaded weapon in my hand. People have shot themselves in their sleep before, their fingers snagging on the trigger while they rolled over, unconsciously searching for a more comfortable position. I cursed myself for risking my life over a raccoon, a goddamned raccoon, as I gently placed the weapon back in the quick access gun safe I kept in my nightstand drawer. I didn't have too much time to quibble with myself over the previous night's events, though. I had to get ready for the housewarming party I planned for my family, and I needed to show off. Before hopping in the shower, I checked my cell to see a text from Rachel. "Good morning, Nick." It read, "I had a great time last night. Good luck with your housewarming party." A smile grew on my face. I immediately forgot about the raccoon fiasco, my thoughts changing course to the date with Rachel. After dinner, we had taken a long stroll down by the lake and talked well into the dark hours. I don't normally open up about my disparate family dynamic to people, but holding her soft hand in mine gave me a giddiness enough to open my mental floodgates and spill my personal details. Somehow, we had explained much about our life stories to each other with ease, finding many similarities between our upbringings. I'd thought about asking her to come, but felt that it might be too much after only one date. I had done so little dating in my adult life that I wasn't quite sure what a normal flow should be in a romantic relationship, but I did think that we were starting one. Besides, subjugating her to deal with my stepfamily seemed cruel. So instead, I resent a text message returning her thoughts about having a great time with the date, and added that I hoped we could do it again soon. Later that afternoon, I had just finished setting up the large charcuterie board, arranged based on a picture Rachel had sent me when the doorbell rang. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and opened the door with a fake smile. "Good to see you, Nicholas," my stepsister said, with an equally fake smile, holding some sort of casserole over her pregnant belly. "Thanks for coming, Abilene." I returned as I held the door open for the parade of her 3 kids aged 6, 4, and 2. Her tired-looking husband, Brad, held up the rear of the formation holding a stained diaper bag. Seeing that my stepbrother, Joshua, was rolling down the street in his silver minivan, I kept the door open. "It's a little big for someone without any kids, don't you think?" Abilene said, in the voice one makes when they are trying to mask their condescending judgment with a compliment. The blows were being thrown early, but it was my day to show off. I refused to let Abilene take that from me. "Nope," I said, not having to fake my grin this time. I enjoy the space, and if I do decide to have kids, this way they won't be stuck sharing rooms. Her fake smile dropped at this low blow, taking the subtle hit about how she would soon have a family of 6, living in a 3-bedroom suburban townhouse. Tennessee versus Georgia is on, I said, tossing Brad the remote. I have all the games, though. Feel free to pick whatever. Sup, man, said Josh as he walked in with his wife and 2 kids in tow. Hey, man. Brad's getting the game on. Food is on the counter, and there are some new toys in the basement for the kids. Josh and I didn't bother trying to fake kind formalities the way Abilene does. At the mention of toys, the herd of kids rushed to the basement to see what wonders I had purchased to keep them entertained. All of the kids enjoyed Uncle Nick, much to their parents' dismay. It's stupid and weird, the way we all act like a happy, normal family, despite the obvious disdain we feel for each other. But we did it for the sake of our parents. After my mom died from cancer in 2002, my dad had become a born-again Christian and married Joanne, a prudent widow from his congregation. Within 18 months of my mother's death, I was forced into a step-family with a prude woman and her 2 prude children. Joanne and her children always looked down on me. She treated me as a second-class citizen compared to her 2 children, whom she regarded as angels. They had good grades and stood out as faithful members of the congregation at their private religious school. Meanwhile, I was lucky enough to have been kicked out of the school after slipping a Korn album into the CD player before the Easter choir program the poor children were forced to sing in. Joanne had found my CD stash after Josh snitched and told her where I hid them. She made me watch as she broke them all. But being expelled meant I was gloriously reunited with my friends at the public school. While my step-siblings made honors and memorized their Bible verses, I kept my grades just good enough to stay on the wrestling team and spent my off-season skateboarding. Joanne and her church taught me that to be happy and successful, I had to go straight to college, go to church, get married, and have babies. Metal and skateboarding taught me to stick a finger to those assholes and do it my own way. Wrestling taught me that hard work is the avenue to success. Instead of going to college at the sacrifice of student loans and my dad's retirement like Abilene and Joshua, I worked roofing during the day to pay for welding technical school at night. After getting my certifications debt-free, I took welding work on the pipelines for a couple of years before taking Department of Defense contracts overseas. While my step-siblings were graduating college with student debt, getting married, and barely making ends meet after the cost of children, I was stacking my bank account. Sure, the work was grueling, and the quality of life welding in the Middle East was less than substandard, but I worked hard and was good at my job. Josh used his degree in business to become the manager of a tire store, and Abilene put her $25,000 piece of paper degree on the wall and became a stay-at-home mom. Meanwhile, I made a triple-digit salary, with my cost of living being almost nil. I put almost every dollar away in savings and investments that stacked up quickly. Finally, 15 months ago, I came back home and started my own business, which was taking off. Now, I had my 3 employees work the shitty hours on the pipelines while I handled the work that could be done in shop. I did this all without wasting money on college or time at church. That's why I built such a nice house I didn't need to say fuck you to everybody who doubted me, to let them know I did it my way and did it better. Nick, the house looks amazing. Congratulations. This time I didn't have to fake the smile on my face. I turned and gave my dad a big hug, happy to finally hear someone be genuinely happy for me. In my late teen years and early 20s, we hadn't talked much. But in the past 4 years, we managed to put the past behind us and forgive each other. Now we spend every other weekend fishing. Thanks, Dad, I said, before seeing Joanne's fake smile behind him. It's a little big for someone without kids, don't you think? Joanne asked, like mother, like daughter. Before I could come up with anything to fire back with, Abigail, Abeline's oldest child, tapped me on the elbow. "Uncle Nick, I thought you didn't have any kids." She phrased the statement as if it was a question. "I don't," I told her, crouching down to make better eye contact with her. "Then who's the little girl downstairs?" "What little girl?" I asked. "The only kids here are your cousins and siblings." "No, there's a little girl in the laundry room. She keeps crying." I shuddered at the mention of the laundry room. Under normal circumstances, it would have been much easier to chalk this up to the imagination, but I was still haunted by a bad feeling deep in my chest about what happened the night before. "I promise you there's nobody in there," I told her, pushing any doubts to the corner of my mind. "But there is. I saw her," Abby insisted, getting frustrated that I didn't believe her. "Okay," I said before her mother could intervene. "Let's go take a look." She grabbed my hand and led me downstairs, her parents following behind. "See? No one here," I told her, secretly relieved. But she was right there, Abby insisted, pointing to the corner furthest from the door. "Right there." I was at a loss for words, not sure how to explain this away. The chance to attempt an explanation was taken away from me anyhow, as Abeline started scolding her daughter. She went off on something about making up stories, but I wasn't listening because, for a split second, I thought I heard the faint crying of a little girl. Later that night. The one nice thing about my stepfamily is that nobody overstays their welcome. By 3:30 in the afternoon, everybody had left, and I collapsed on my couch with a beer in my left hand and a phone in my right. I'd asked Rachel to stop by and finish off the charcuterie that had been barely touched by my family, but unfortunately, she was obligated to family dinner. Although I wanted to see her, I couldn't complain about an evening spent watching football and drinking a few beers. But before I got too comfortable, I went downstairs and tucked away all of the toys the children had enjoyed. Cars and Barbies were strewn all over the basement, but I was happy to see that the kids had dived into the books I had purchased as well. Their books at home were largely religious-based. I figured they'd enjoy a couple of books about farts and such. I shoved everything into storage underneath the stairs. The rocking horse barely fit through the door because it was so large. It hadn't been cheap, but the kids had absolutely loved it, making it worth every penny. Before I headed up the stairs, I stopped and stared at that laundry room. I didn't want to admit it, but the room exuded a sort of feeling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It just felt wrong. Even looking at the room from a distance left me feeling uneasy and creeped out. It was more than just the weird experiences that both Abigail and I had. It was a feeling of hellish dread that seemed to emanate from the room. I hurried over and closed the door before quickly moving up the stairs. I had a dream that night. At least I thought it was a dream, where I found myself in the basement washroom. It was crying that had drawn me to the room, the crying of a child. She was in the corner, wearing white pajamas with pink unicorns. She was sitting down, her legs crossed in front of her. Her head was buried in her hands, with her long brown hair draped over her in a tangled mess. She was sobbing uncontrollably. I'm no expert in kids, but I guessed her to be 6 or 7 years old. I knelt behind her and put a soft hand on her shoulder. At my touch, she flinched and stiffened up, as if bracing for a hit. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. Maybe I can help you." "What's the matter?" I told her in the most soothing, non-threatening manner that I could. She loosened some at the sound of my voice, but continued to cry with soft sobs. "I'm stuck here," she said between sobs. "What do you mean you're stuck here? How'd you get here anyway?" I asked. "The bad man brought me here, and we can't leave. We're stuck here with the scary thing." She burst into another round of sobs. "What do you mean you're stuck?" I asked, ignoring all of the other nagging questions. Maybe I can help you, I added reassuringly. At that, she stopped crying and turned her head to face me. You can help me? She asked, now facing me with her hair obscuring most of her face. Of course, I said warmly. I reached up and brushed the hair away from her face, but immediately pulled back when I saw it. I tried not to show the horror and disgust I felt, but that was nearly impossible. Her face was battered, bruised, swollen, and misshapen so horribly that I couldn't get a single idea of what she actually looked like. She looked as if she had been ruthlessly beaten. Her swollen neck displayed deep bruising and rings completely circling her neck. Please, she said again, grabbing my hand as she started to cry again. Please, you have to help me. You have to help, please? Before I could get a grip on myself and think of something to say, the lights in the room went out. With the darkness, a cold fell on the room, the kind of cold you'd expect to feel outside on a cold winter night. I heard something walk up behind me and felt it too. It was a presence, a cold, dark, evil presence. The girl screamed so loud it hurt my ears. Behind me I heard laughter, a deep, maniacal laughter. No! She screamed as the laughing intensified. No, 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 no! Help! Heal! Pop! That's when I woke up. I rubbed my eyes, scared, but relieved that it was only a dream. My relief didn't last long, however, as I realized that I was not in my bed, nor was I on my couch. I was on the floor of the laundry room. At the realization, I jumped to my feet and hurried to the light switch, nearly slamming into the wall. I felt along the wall, frantically searching for the light switch that seemed to no longer be there. At last, I found the light switch and flipped the lights on immediately, pushing out the darkness. There was no little girl, no terrifying laughter, but there was the rocking horse, the one I had put under the stairs only hours ago. The following day, I hadn't slept at all after waking up on the laundry room floor. After that dream, which I was not sure was an actual dream, I felt genuinely shaken up. To be completely honest, I was scared, and more than just a little bit. Too many strange things had happened in my home in such little time. I tried to reason with myself that everything had a logical explanation. This house was brand spanking new. It couldn't be haunted, could it? But in my heart, I knew something unexplainable was taking place. I could feel it. Rachel was on her way, though, which granted me a welcome distraction. We had plans to make and eat breakfast together. The text she sent telling me that she was on her way brought a smile to my face, and I immediately pushed aside my fear because I needed to freshen up. I had a lady to impress. So, Nick, how are you settling in with this handsome house? Rachel asked, as we sipped our second or third serving of mimosas. The golden morning sun shone through the large windows that faced the rear of the home, warmly illuminating the home in such a way that made it hard to believe the unsettling experiences I'd had. You know, it's great, I said. My mind involuntarily moved to the incident with the little girl, but I didn't want to sound like an idiot. Really, I'm surprised every time I see it. It seems too beautiful to be mine. Why do you hesitate? She asked. What do you mean? You hesitated. Is there something that you don't like about the house? No, it's just that. I trailed off, not sure if I wanted to finish the sentence. Tell me, Rachel insisted, slamming the table in a pretend show of aggressive frustration. I think this house is haunted, I blurted out. But it's brand new, Rachel returned, looking more serious this time. I know how that sounds, I said, putting my hands up as if surrendering. But hear me out. I proceeded to tell Rachel everything, starting at the beginning with the time I saw a child peering out the window as we left for our date. I told her about the footsteps I sometimes heard at night, about the crying girl my niece insisted she had seen, and finally about the weird dream I had before waking up in the laundry room. I finished the story while Rachel listened intently. I paused, worried that she'd think me crazy and make an excuse to leave. But her response was nothing of the sort. "I believe you," she said, putting down her glass. I let out the breath that I hadn't realized that I was holding in, relieved to find a serious but reassuring look on her face. "I saw a girl too, on the day you moved in." I blew it off and kept telling myself that it was some sort of illusion, but I haven't been able to let it go. She put her hand to her head as if experiencing a serious headache. It just felt so, well, creepy. I don't know how else to put it. A small smile crept on my face. I was aware that the smile was out of place, but I found it strangely touching to know that I wasn't alone in these strange, even dark, experiences. Rachel looked at me confused for a moment before she also smiled, and we both broke into a weird fit of anxious laughter. "My brand new house is haunted," I said after getting a hold of myself and finding a more serious tone. "I'll be honest, I'm scared of my house." "Well," Rachel started, with her flirtatious glint reappearing in her eye, "maybe it wouldn't be so bad if you weren't sleeping alone." "I think you might be right," I laughed, "but I'm not sure my bed is big enough. Maybe we should go make sure my bed will fit us both." The bed, as it turns out, was plenty big and sturdy, enough for the both of us. 2 weeks later. I had woken up around 1 a.m. to the pitter-patter of feet running throughout the house, an occurrence that had happened often to both myself and Rachel over the previous 2 weeks. We'd both heard crying a time or two and had just ignored it. The toys that I had kept stored underneath the stairs were often found scattered around the basement. Although somewhat creepy, I had decided to just let it happen. Rachel had stayed over most nights, which was great for many reasons. I'd sometimes wondered if things were moving too fast, but it was working great, and I'm not one to argue with a good thing. Besides, I felt much more at ease not being alone at night, and I began to think that maybe I could get used to living in a haunted house. I reasoned with myself that it was just a child ghost after all, and what harm could a child be? Despite that, I couldn't escape the disconcerting question as to why a child would be haunting my house. The house was brand new. There were no previous occupants to have died in the home. Rachel and I theorized that perhaps there had been a car accident on the road resulting in the death of a child, but had not been able to find any corroborating evidence while searching the news archives. That particular night, however, it felt different. Usually, it was just a sound that I could blow off and go back to sleep, allowing the sound to be filtered out with the background noise. Instead, I felt an intrusive sense of fear, dread, and sorrow that held me tight to the bed and threatened tears as I suddenly wanted to cry. I wanted to move, but the weight of fear pinned me to the mattress. I heard a whisper, in the voice of a scared child, say, "Please, please help me." The whisper in my ear was enough to overcome my paralyzing fear and jolt me to my feet. I had to get away from whatever was going on, the way you feel the need to get away from a bee buzzing in your ear. I walked quickly, but quietly, to the master bedroom where I splashed water on my face. The soothing touch of the cold water shocked my senses, but helped bring me back to reality. It was probably just a dream, another creepy dream brought to me courtesy of my creepy house. My chest expanded as I inhaled a deep, comforting breath, then relaxed as my chest pushed the breath out, allowing me to open my eyes. My heart plunged into my kidney the second I opened my eyes. There was someone, or maybe I should say something, standing directly behind me. The monstrous thing was humanoid in form, but there is no way it could be called human. It towered above me, standing so tall that its head was nearly touching the ceiling. Although it was dark, I could see that its skin was composed of a blotchy black and red, yet slightly translucent plastic-like substance that reminded me of dirty saran wrap. I desperately wanted to run, or scream, or anything besides just standing there, but I once again found myself held tight with paralyzing fear. Although it had no iris nor pupils to be seen, I felt its empty white eyes staring madly into mine. The thing leaned forward until its head was just above mine in the reflection and placed a hand on my shoulder. The hand was so cold that it burned as if my skin had encountered dry ice. My reaction was to pull away from the pain, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, and not just by fear. Some force had stolen my ability to move. I found myself unable to so much as grimace at the pain in my shoulder. The hideous beast smiled at me in a threatening fashion, exposing black gums with only a handful of long gray teeth. It winked at me, as if to say, "There's nothing you can do to stop me." And then it was gone. The weight was lifted from my shoulder and the burning stopped. I dared an attempt to wiggle my fingers and found that I had regained the freedom to move of my own free will. I had just enough time to turn on the light before the screaming started. Piercing screams of intense fear and agony exploded through the house, dicing the eerie silence of the night. My first thought was of Rachel, so I burst back into the room to find her still asleep, unfazed by the horrific screams as if she could not hear them at all. The screaming continued, and my heart fell as I realized the agonizing sound was coming from the basement. I didn't want to go. I was terrified and considered waking Rachel and vacating the damned house. But my inner conscience told me I needed to try and help the poor hurting souls, despite the fact that I hadn't the slightest idea how to do so. I made my decision, and without further hesitation, I hurried to the basement. As I descended the stairs, the screaming grew louder. I reached the basement where I found the light in the laundry room flickering so fast it created a strobe-like effect, casting flickering shadows across the entire basement as if a concert was playing. I ran into the room where the toy horse was rocking violently in the middle. Laundry detergent fell off a shelf and burst onto the floor as the screams reached an unbearable and inhuman volume, so loud pain erupted deep inside my ears. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing so hard that it hurt my head, but it did little to vanquish the intensity of my pain. My knees were suddenly weak as I became physically and emotionally overwhelmed, and I collapsed to my knees as if the weight of my body had become too much for my shaky legs to carry. The sound was all-encompassing, not coming from any specific part of the room, but existing in all parts of the room. I squeezed my eyes shut in a feeble attempt to concentrate and find some sort of solution when it hit me. The walls. The screams were coming from the walls. Before I understood what I was doing, I stood and slammed my fist into the wall closest to me. My hand went straight through the drywall, hitting the concrete behind it. A pain shot through my knuckles and up through my elbow, but in the adrenaline-fueled moment, I paid the pain little mind and ripped as much of the drywall out as I could. I used the opening to grab more drywall and rip off piece after piece until finally, an entire board of drywall was loose. I grabbed one more time and pulled, forcing the entire 8-foot by 4-foot section to fall. The screaming stopped immediately, as did the strobing of the light. For a brief moment, all was still. The room was quiet. After the drywall fell, a plastic bundle fell from between the exposed framing and hit the floor with a dull thud, landing partially on my bare foot. I was breathing heavily, but managed to take a couple of deep breaths and regain some composure at the eerie but welcome silence. I took a knee beside the bundle and rolled it over. What I found caused my heart to beat with the ferocity of a death metal drum solo that blurred my vision with every beat. Tightly squeezed inside the layers of thick plastic was that little girl, the one I had seen crying in the basement. Or her body, I should say. I could see her misshapen and rotting face still frozen with the fear of her final moments of life. Her brown hair, coated in decaying blood, was plastered against her face by the tightly wrapped plastic. It took me a few moments to notice that now I was the one screaming. I backed away, shocked by the body that had been rotting within the walls of the home I had been so proud of. Then, the lights went out, submerging me into a pit of darkness. The only thing I could see was the demonic beast that I had encountered earlier, somehow visible in the eternal darkness. The scary thing. I backed away as it moved toward me, a menacing combination of amusement and hatred staining its almost human face. I felt my heel slip out from under me on the spilled laundry detergent. I fell, hitting the back of my head on the washer. 20 minutes later, I regained consciousness outside the house, where I found myself on a stretcher being pushed down the driveway. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off the white exterior of the home, illuminating it in a daunting fashion. It reminded me of the day I was given the keys, and I once again found the house to appear daunting and secretive. I knew that what I had just uncovered was only a scratch on the surface of the hellish secrets contained in that home. A sobbing and exasperated Rachel was explaining what had happened to a shocked-looking officer as more patrol cars raced down the street. He looked to be about my age, old enough to have some solid experience under his belt, but the look on his face showed that no amount of training and experience could have prepared him for this. Despite the chaos, I felt at ease. Somehow I knew that it was over, for that little girl at least. She'd asked for help, begged for it, and I thought that maybe I had given her the help she needed, the help she deserved. The next few nights were a nightmare of a different sort. I repeatedly gave careful statements to the police, trying to describe how I came to find a body in the walls of my house in the middle of the night, without raising suspicion or sounding crazy. They had searched my house for more bodies. Thankfully, there were none. What they did find, though, was a large pentagram, along with other demonic symbols painted underneath the flooring. The general contractor of the house had been brought in for questioning, who quickly admitted that because I had picked cheaper finishing for the room, he had hired some guy off the classifieds and paid him under the table. DNA evidence found on the body matched multiple crimes across the country, and the contractor was able to successfully ID the same man in a photo lineup. The going theory is that this man performed some sort of satanic sacrifice in the night when nobody else was around. He then covered it up with the flooring and by hiding the body in the wall. The little girl had been kidnapped from her home in a different state 6 months prior, which meant he kept her for several months before killing her. The worst part is, they have only a photo of this man, no name or solid information to be found. Nobody knows exactly who he is, why he did what he did, or where he is now. He's still out there, and I know without a doubt that he'll kill again. How to survive in hell. I woke up in a birthing sack. Panicked and choking on amniotic fluid, I clawed at the fleshy walls, fighting with all my terrified strength to free myself. With a wet ripping sound, I was dumped onto the muddy cobbles of the street below, twisting my ankle as I landed. Cold rain blasted my naked body clean of the sack's liquid. I tried and failed to get to my feet. The street was alien to me, an insane medley of architecture ranging from the modern to the prehistoric. The sky above boiled with storm clouds, illuminating my surroundings with non-stop flashes of lightning. A man walked over to me. His hair was matted with filth, and the rain streaked down his mismatched leather clothes. He said nothing, just watched me squirm on the floor. "Please," I gasped. "Help me." He answered by slamming a foot down on my face, breaking my jaw and making my vision reel. He moved onto my limbs, stamping and tugging until he heard the bones snap. Crippled, naked, and screaming, there was nothing I could do to defend myself when he started to eat me alive. My introduction to hell wasn't unusual. Very few people survive their first hour, let alone their first night. When they die, they go through the same thing again, emerging from a new birthing sac in another part of the city. Eventually, they learn to attack the first person they see, and if they're lucky, they'll be able to kill that person. That's the one rule of hell: the strong take from the weak. Get used to the idea, and you might just make it through the afterlife. I'm going to give you a helping hand. Consider this your handbook to hell, a primer on the inferno. Make no mistake, though, I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. When you die, you'll owe me one. Don't worry about trying to find me. I guarantee we'll run into each other eventually. Eternity is a long fucking time, so it's a matter of when rather than if. Do as I tell you, and you'll have a better chance than most of avoiding my own nasty introduction to the pit. Welcome to hell. Some people swear they saw a light at the end of the tunnel when they died. To my mind, those people either hallucinated or they're lying. Most of us just wake up in a birthing sac a few minutes after death. The buildings of hell are covered in the things, horrible yellow-brown pimples growing out of the brick. I've already mentioned that the first thing you need to do is claw your way out and get ready to fight. This is where the real bitch of the situation comes into play, since not everybody has the strength to break through their sac's flesh. You get the body you had just before you died, see? So, let's say you were born a cripple, or maybe you died too young or too old. Tough shit. You're going to have a rough eternity drowning in birthing fluid over and over. If you manage to break free of your sack, don't waste time moping around, wondering what the fuck happened. Get on your feet and get ready to defend yourself. Chances are good that the first person who sees you will be hungry. There are no plants or animals in hell, so cannibalism is your only option if you don't fancy starving to death and having to start over. Aim to kill the first person you see. It might take a few tries. Most of hell's residents have been fighting for survival a lot longer than you. They might have armor made from tanned skin, scavenged metal and bone. They'll almost certainly have a shiv, club, or axe. All of that will be useful to you if you can take it from them. The next thing to do is find shelter. It never stops raining in hell, and pneumonia is a shitty way to die. Luckily, you'll have a selection of buildings to choose from. Ever wanted to live in a rundown Victorian manor with half a roof and no furniture? How about an ancient Egyptian mud brick hovel? If people have built it, you can find a crumbling version of it in hell. Pick a building, kill any squatters you find and move in. The best houses are the ones that come with a supply of scrap metal and timber. Not only are these good for making weapons with, they're also vital for getting drinkable water. I learned the hard way that hell's rain is teeming with disease. It has to be boiled before it's safe, so getting a fire going and something to make a bowl with is a necessity. So, we've killed our first man and found a home. Things are going well. Get that far, and you're going to want to hang on to what you have forever. You won't. Something will kill you eventually, and you'll have to start over. My record is a year. If you want to beat that, you'll need to understand hell and its denizens. The damned. The people of hell can be grouped into two categories. The first, the fresh meat, are those who've just climbed out of a birthing sack. It's kill or be killed when it comes to fresh meat. Always has been. The newly birthed want clothing and tools, and will kill to get hold of them. The second category, the residents, view fresh meat as a quick and easy supply of food, leather and bone. Residents have an easier time of it for sure, and all of them will fight to retain their resident status for as long as they can. Make no mistake though, residents victimize each other just as much as they prey on the fresh meat. If you're a woman, for instance, well, you better get over any hang-ups you have about rape. Women get raped in hell far more than men. It's just a fact. If you're not one of those bodybuilders or warrior women, do the smart thing and prostitute yourself for protection. Self-respect doesn't keep you breathing. Remember how you get the body you had just before you died? Well, that fact forms the core of Hell's society. The truth of the matter is that throughout history, it's usually been men who die in battle. That means that in Hell, there are a lot of men with young, strong bodies fit for war. Don't like it? Tough. Those are the guys who call the shots. If you can't fight them, you better do as they tell you. If you live long enough and fight well enough, you might get invited into one of the resident tribes. These are groups of people who band together for the sake of safety in numbers. Believe me, being part of a group makes things a lot easier in Hell. However, keep in mind that you're only part of the tribe for as long as you're a resident. Get yourself killed, and it's back to being fresh meat. Tribes offer the closest thing to civilized society you'll find in Hell. If you're part of a tribe, you have people on your side who probably won't kill you unless shit gets rough. Doesn't sound like much, but that's about as good as it gets. My own survival record was thanks to getting into a tribe. Life was good for a while there. We had about 50 soldiers and plenty of girls to fuck. Nobody could touch us, and the men abided by an honor code, so the usual fear of being stabbed in the back by your friends wasn't too much of an issue. I could have spent my eternity in reasonable comfort, but Hell has ways of fucking over a good thing. Human flesh and boiled rainwater doesn't exactly make for a balanced diet, and sooner or later, even the strongest resident dies of malnutrition. I did well to last a year on it, though the last few months were agony. If I believed in God, I'd swear he designed Hell in such a way that nobody stays on top of the food chain for long. The city and the wasteland. Most of the damned live in Dis, the city of Hell. That's where all the fresh meat is born, and considering the size of the place coupled with the short life expectancy, a lot of people will spend eternity without ever setting foot outside of Dis. Take my advice. Do not leave the city. Things are rough on the streets, that's true. But trust me when I say it gets a whole lot worse if you try to leave. Dis is surrounded by a wasteland called Gehenna. At first glance, it doesn't look like much, just an empty expanse of gray stretching out into infinity. Sometimes the damned lose that fire in the belly, the will to survive, and set off wandering into Gehenna. Most of them never come back. I made the walk myself once, a long time ago. I don't care how hard you think you are. Spend enough time in Hell, and it starts to break you down. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm a good person who never deserved this. Nobody can say that and not be a liar. I'm not evil, though, or rather, I wasn't. Not until I got to Hell. You murder, rape, and torture because you know they do the same to you. You're murdered, raped, and tortured because they know you'll do the same to them. Give it long enough and you just don't want to face it anymore. That's when you take the walk into Gehenna. The first couple of miles I walked were nothing special. The rain stopped after a while, the sludge beneath my feet giving way to gray ash, and I caught my first glimpse of Hell's sky beyond the clouds. It was a flat gray with a white sun, completely devoid of beauty or warmth. I trudged on. While walking through Gehenna, I lost any urge to eat, drink, or sleep. My body started to waste away, but I didn't care. Even when my skin started to peel away and my bones were exposed, I didn't care. The further I walked, the hollower I became in mind, body, and soul. I don't know what would have happened if I'd kept going. Frankly, I don't want to know. Some part of me still wanted to live, so I turned back. I'd walked for days, maybe weeks, yet when I turned around, Dis was only a few steps away. I stepped back into the city and my body finally fell apart. When I emerged from my birthing sack, I swore never to step foot into Gehenna again, escaping from hell. There are ways to leave hell. That should be obvious. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to you, would I? Sometimes the living get it into their heads that they want to talk with the dead. They get their crystals, incense, and spirit boards in the hopes of reaching their loved ones. Most do nothing more than trick themselves into thinking they've made contact. They smile or cry, convinced their beloved granny is playing the harp on a cloud somewhere before getting on with their lives. A few have the skill to actually reach us, though. They can open a gate between hell and the world of the living that we perceive as a pillar of fire stretching down from the clouds. As soon as one of those pillars shows up, the damned scramble to be the first to get to it. You haven't seen the true nature of man until you've watched thousands of the damned swarming over each other, kicking, biting, and clawing to be the one who escapes. Contacting the dead always results in a bloodbath. Even the most civilized tribes fall apart the instant it becomes clear that only one of them can leave. I've left hell twice now, left my body behind and ridden that pillar of fire up into the clouds. Some people believe that you can be possessed by demons. Let me tell you something. Demons aren't real. What the living see as demonic possession is just one of the damned testing out their new body. Let's face it, if you've fought your way through hell to get back to the world of the living, you're not going to be on your best behavior for long. Sooner or later, we take things too far. Our host dies, or their family cave and recruit an exorcist. Then we're fresh out of the birthing sack and on the streets again. I'm gonna go now. When you get to hell, remember my advice and that you owe me one. Maybe we can form a tribe someday. For the time being, though, I want to see what my new body can do. By now, you should have a good idea of what you can expect from hell. You know to kill the first person you see when you fight your way out of a birthing sack. You know to find clothing, tools, and shelter. You know that no matter what you do, how well you do, someday it's back to being fresh meat. Dis is the biggest city you can imagine. Tribes fight and die for territory, and taking a wrong turn is a fucking death sentence. You'll get a feel for where you should and shouldn't go eventually. Develop the kind of street smarts you need to stay a resident for more than a day. Even so, there are places in Des that you should know about. Let's do a little sightseeing tour of hell. Maybe the advance warning will do you some good. Skin Street. Allow me to tell you about the first time I saw Skin Street. I dropped out of my birthing sack onto the road, stood straight back up, and got myself ready to fight. Nobody was there. Not one single person was out on a street that stretched for miles in either direction. I relaxed a little and took a look around. Most of the streets in Dice are a labyrinthine network of buildings. You spend most of your stay in hell paranoid that, just around the next corner, there's someone ready to beat you down. Skin Street isn't like that. It's a single straight line with only the rain and the darkness to hamper visibility. I felt more vulnerable there than I've felt in any other part of Dis. You ever walked into a wide, empty space and suddenly felt exposed? Yeah, imagine also being naked, unarmed, and in hell. Still, I knew what I was supposed to do. The first step was to find some clothing. That's where I learned how Skin Street got its name. Every building, every busted streetlight and gas lamp was decorated with flayed skin. I'd been in hell long enough by that point to not be too freaked out, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me. In a fucked up kind of way, it reminded me of Christmas. You know? People hanging wreaths and lights from their houses, that sort of thing. I remembered the time I'd spent with my family, with my kids on Christmas morning. Feelings like that get you killed. I pushed them back down and pulled some scraps from the nearest building. If somebody was going to leave clothing material lying about, I may as well take it, right? I didn't know it at the time, but every step I took on Skin Street was being watched. When the attack came, I didn't even get a glimpse of the guy. Bang! My skull fractured from an expert swing of a club. Whoever hit me went for my eyes the second I hit the floor, stuck his fingers right into my sockets. I was blind and crying like a baby when he started to peel away my skin. Here's the thing. Some people are fucked up even by hell's standards. The loners, serial killers, stalkers, and psychos all make their way to Skin Street in the end. Most of the damned use the whole body of a kill, but the Skin Street people like to take trophies. They leave their ornaments out as bait for the ignorant, skulking in the shadows and waiting for the best moment to ambush. If you find yourself on Skin Street, you're going to have to think fast. Forget clothing. Just grab a rock, piece of wood, or anything else you can use as a weapon. Stay out of the shadows, keep checking behind you, and get out of there as quickly as you can. Perdition Farms. You're going to be chased in hell. That's unavoidable. At some point you'll stumble into somebody bigger than you, or you'll find yourself outnumbered. Forget about a fair fight. If somebody can take you down without you fighting back, you bet that's what they'll do. It's easy to lose focus when you're running for your life. You can forget to pay attention to your surroundings. That, my friend, is a big mistake. The outskirts of Perdition Farms are littered with billboards. They promise free food and safety to anybody fucking stupid enough to believe them. The tribes that fight over that particular territory like to herd people off the streets and into the industrial complex they call home. The good news is that those tribes won't kill you. The bad news is that they're big fans of taking people alive. They've got a project, you see. Been working on it for as long as I can remember. I couldn't tell you who originally decided that hell should have organized food production. Only that the idea stuck, and that over the years, countless tribes have taken it upon themselves to try and make that dream a reality. Get yourself captured by them, and you can look forward to a bit of slave labor. For the most part, the Perdition Farms tribes try to make use of the birthing pods as a source of food. They force their slaves to harvest them from the walls, grind them up in industrial vats, mix them with blood, body parts, rainwater, and anything else that could conceivably make a broth. The life of a slave is short, brutal, and disgusting, particularly when those slaves are then used as guinea pigs for the latest concoction. You see, amniotic fluid can be drunk if you're desperate, though drinking too much is guaranteed to make you empty your stomach from every available orifice. The flesh of the sacs is a different matter, though. I couldn't tell you exactly what the birthing sacs are. Some people say they're actual flesh, while others swear they're more like a fungus. What I do know is that they repair themselves over time. Eat some of their flesh, and over the next few days you'll grow a new birthing sac inside you. It's a small mercy that you won't live long enough to see it break through your skin. You'll be dead shortly after your stomach bursts. If you're lucky, your days as a slave will end when the tribe decides they want some real meat. They're not stupid enough to test their broth themselves, not when there's no shortage of slaves in hell. Look, I can't force you to stay out of Perdition Farms. I can only offer advice. In my opinion, if you think you're being herded there, it's better to take whatever's to hand and cut your own throat. I'd take fresh meat status 100 times before spending another day on the farms. The boneyard. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm the kind of nutjob who'd join a cult. Is there anything in hell for me? If that sounds like you, the boneyard has you covered. You see, there's a certain kind of religious fanatic who really does belong in hell. I'm not talking about the old dears who bake cakes to raise money for the new church roof here. I'm talking about the guys who went to war because God commanded it, who burned women for supposedly consorting with demons, and who saw nothing wrong with fucking the odd kid. When those people get to hell, they're too thick-headed to make sense of what happened. Why face reality when you can pretend it's all just a test of faith? They find like-minded folk in the boneyard. I'm told that at one time, the boneyard was a cathedral surrounded by a cemetery that stretched from horizon to horizon. Maybe that's true. I don't know. These days, it's a shanty town of temples and churches built from materials scavenged from the streets. Everywhere you look, you'll find wild-eyed zealots preaching their own twisted version of redemption and gangs of masked men on the prowl for fresh converts. Mortification of the flesh is the main pastime in the boneyard. If you listen to the cacophony of sermons, you'll be informed of how the flesh is wicked and must be purged of sin. How lucky we are to be given such a holy duty. How fortunate to be given the opportunity to redeem ourselves before God. The people of the boneyard have had a long time and plenty of fucking practice when it comes to mastering torture and degradation. I'm not a good person. I've killed, raped, and cannibalized, but I can honestly tell you I'd never have been able to dream up some of the shit that goes on in the boneyard. I wandered in there by accident once, and I've never been able to get what I saw out of my brain. I watched a woman, naked and bound, forced onto her knees and violated with iron rods. A preacher sewed his own eyes and lips shut in front of a crowd before sawing off his manhood with a piece of slate. A boy of maybe 14 was publicly crucified. A girl was drowned in shit. An older man had sharpened flint pushed under his fingernails. I could list off 100 other atrocities done in the name of redemption. Stay away from the boneyard. The people there decided that hell just isn't hellish enough for their liking. Forget about redemption. Forget about God. The only way out of hell is by riding a pillar of fire and taking over a living body. Focus on that if you want to escape. The damned can't offer you salvation. The damned only offer pain. I have to leave you soon. If I'm to make the most of life on earth, I'm afraid I'm going to have to skip town. While I've had plenty to keep myself entertained, this body just isn't suitable for a run-in with the police. It's only a matter of time until some nosy neighbor thinks to pick up the phone. With the humidity over the last few days, Mummy and Daddy are already pretty ripe. Here's something you have to understand. Hell is a big place. I've given you fair warning about a few of the locations I myself have run into, and that will have to do. Even if I wrote a library's worth of novels solely dedicated to mapping out the distinct locations within D's, I still couldn't tell you everything about the city. What I can do is give you a bit of information about some of the damned, the slaughter man. Take a moment to think about all the celebrities you know. How many of them do you reckon would do well in D's? Not many, I'll wager. Perhaps none. Fame and fortune on earth doesn't count for shit when you're dead. Very few people are strong enough, mean enough, and downright psychotic enough to earn a reputation in hell. Those few who have what it takes are people you never want to meet. The slaughter man is one of hell's legends, a huge bearded man with filed teeth, bloodshot eyes, and foam on his lips. Rumor has it that the day he first emerged from a birthing sack, he was unlucky enough to land at the feet of a slaver tribe. Well, those tribesmen chuckled to themselves and readied their clubs and whips, only too happy to take some fresh meat captive. Outnumbered 12 to 1, naked, unarmed, and brand new to hell, most people wouldn't stand a chance. If you believe the stories, the slaughterman shrugged off the clubs battering against him and the whips cutting into his flesh as though they were insect bites. He picked up the first slaver, put his hand into the man's mouth, and pulled his jaw right off his skull. He moved on to another, then another, tearing them apart with his bare hands, until the survivors turned and fled. Nobody knows for sure who he was in life. I've heard theories, though, the most popular one being that he was the berserker of Stamford Bridge. Supposedly, a single Viking held up the English army single-handed. It didn't matter that he could never win, that he was outnumbered, that his enemies had better weapons and armor. He stood on that bridge and he fought. By the time he was brought down, he'd killed no less than 40 men. I don't know how true any of this is. I've never seen the slaughter man for myself, and I don't fucking want to. What I can tell you for sure is that people don't become legendary in hell without good reason. I'd guess that the only one who knows the truth is the slaughter man himself, and he isn't saying anything. Since the day he arrived in hell, he's only spoken once. The fleeing slavers heard it as the slaughter man tore their tribe apart. Naked, bloody, and surrounded by corpses, the slaughter man looked up to the storm-racked sky and bellowed a single word. Valhalla! Hellhounds. How about a little story? I wasn't new to hell. I'd made myself some clothes and a wooden club, found shelter and had a big slab of meat roasting over a campfire. The only thing I didn't have was a tribe. The area I'd been birthed in seemed slummy even for Dis, all half-collapsed hovels and mud huts. Iron was scarce, barely enough to make myself a water bowl. All in all, not a good spot for a tribe. My plan was simple enough. I'd have a decent meal, carve myself a shiv or two in case I lost my club, then find somewhere more or less dry to sleep. After that, I'd set off to look for a tribe. Even the mildest tribal initiations result in a few scars and a broken nose, so I wanted to be as well rested as I could be. Sleep in hell is both vital and dangerous. There's a knack to finding somewhere that's simultaneously sheltered, hidden, and with access to an escape route. Even then, you never get more than a few hours at a time. In hell, the slightest suspicious noise should scare the shit out of you. A low, throaty growl definitely counts as a suspicious noise. I leapt out of my impromptu nest of skins and wood, raised my club, and returned the growl with one of my own. A woman had crept into my building and was staring at me with dilated pupils. She looked to be in a bad way, skinny, naked, and covered in weeping sores. Her lips peeled back to reveal broken and jagged teeth. It took me all of a second to size her up. She'd been living rough for days or weeks. Judging from her protruding ribs and bloated stomach, she was well on her way to dying of starvation. So she was weak, hungry, and didn't even have a weapon. I've already eaten, I said, relaxing a little and giving my club a few practice swings. No sense in letting you go to waste, though. I took a step towards her, and she bolted, just turned right around and scampered away in a strange, animal gait. I took off after her, certain that I could outpace her. Even if there wasn't much meat on her, bones can still be useful. I chased her through a few streets, struggling to keep my footing on the muddy ground. When I finally got close enough to swing my club, she stopped dead. The suddenness of it caught me off guard, and I tripped over her, losing my club as I fell. She howled in triumph, a sound that was echoed by a dozen other throats. That day, I learned two things about the hellhounds: the people who lose their minds and become little more than beasts after enduring centuries in hell. Firstly, they have the necessary animal cunning to hunt as a pack. Secondly, human teeth and fingernails are perfectly capable of ripping flesh from the bone. The surgeons. Modern doctors rarely thrive in hell. Academia and reliance on technology don't leave you in the best state to endure the endless violence and brutality. There are exceptions, though. The people who learn to sew their friends back together amid the machine gun fire of the Somme. Shamans, witch doctors, and holy men who endured famine and warfare. Survivalists who knew how to cauterize their own wounds in the middle of a forest. Those are some of the people who might just be strong enough to ply their trade to the damned. After all, working knowledge of basic medicine is just one of those things that's beyond a lot of the meatheads roaming Dis. Most of hell's surgeons find a tribe as soon as they're able. Their tools might be crude, but they soon learn to make do. Flint, slate, and shards of glass serve as their scalpels. They make thread from human hair and needles from slivers of iron. Whenever a member of the tribe has an infected sore, a surgeon will be the one to drain the pus. A tribal surgeon could well save your life, but they'll do it without anesthetic. Then there are the freelance surgeons, the people who try to go it alone. They make themselves a uniform, the theory being that the damned will recognize them if they all look alike. It doesn't really work, but then you can't expect much logic from people who've lost count of how many times they've died. For one thing, fashions change over time. I'm told that freelancers wore headdresses and bone necklaces at one point. The current trend is to mimic Venetian plague doctors by donning a beaked mask and wearing a long coat of fire-blackened skin. Freelancers are rare. Very rare, in fact. You'll see thousands of the damned for every freelance surgeon you come across. When you do come across one, be fucking careful. Firstly, surgeons don't get a free pass in hell. The damned are more likely to attack a freelancer than they are to barter their tools, clothes, or slaves in exchange for his services. You can't be certain if the man in the bird mask and black coat is really a surgeon or somebody who murdered a surgeon and took his clothes. Perhaps they made the outfit themselves in order to draw the weak and the wounded close. Advertising doesn't always work as intended in dis. If the freelancer turns out to be genuine, that doesn't give you an excuse to drop your guard. Freelance surgeons aren't usually the most stable people. Put another way, freelancers are usually sadistic fucking psychopaths. Sure, they might stitch you back together and send you on your way. They might also decide it would be more interesting if they stitched you to somebody else. They might think paying an arm and a leg for their service should be taken literally. They might turn out to be some wannabe serial killer who's yet to find their way to Skin Street. For each freelancer trying to do a tough job in a tougher place, there are a dozen or so Mengeles who want to try out their toys on somebody too injured to fight back. Stick with your tribe's surgeon if you're lucky enough to have one. Failing that, learn to patch up your own wounds. Trust me, if you're able to read, you've already got the intellectual advantage over a lot of hell's residents. Universal education is pretty recent. Freelancers aren't worth the risk. Cambions. I'll be honest with you here. I don't know if cambions actually exist. What I'm going to tell you is something that somebody else told me. It's up to you to decide if it's true or not. Personally, I really fucking hope it isn't. People rape one another in hell. It happens a lot. If you're not strong enough, it'll happen a lot to you. The good news for the ladies out there is that damned men fire blanks. You'll almost never be impregnated. I say almost never because, if you believe the stories, there's an incredibly slim chance that a couple of those little swimmers will be awake and looking for an egg. Just to put this in perspective, we're talking conjoined twins levels of unlikeliness here, and that's just conception. The chances of a pregnant woman surviving the full 9 months in hell are probably conjoined triplets levels of unlikely. You're talking about a perfect storm of beating the odds here, but this is eternity. A monkey randomly mashing keys on a typewriter will eventually produce the complete works of Shakespeare if it goes at it for eternity. The result of that perfect storm, of those monkeys with their typewriters, is a cambion, a child conceived and born in hell. I'm not saying they exist, okay? I'm saying I've met somebody who swears it's true, and that he's seen a cambion for himself. You see babies in their birthing sacks from time to time. Usually it's just a body. Occasionally you see one drowning. Most of the damned ignore them. They wouldn't survive a day on the streets, even if you could afford to devote your full attention to them. Better to leave them be. It's only the really fucked up people who cut through the sacks and... Yeah, I'm not going to finish that thought. I'm getting sidetracked. So, this cambion who may or may not have existed apparently looked like a normal child. It cried, it shit, and it sucked its mother's tits just like a regular baby would. The mother was part of a tribe, and they'd been able to protect her throughout her pregnancy. Couldn't tell you why. Curiosity, perhaps? When it was born, the whole tribe gathered around to have a look. Among them was the man who told me this story, somebody I'd meet years later and eventually kill. This man cut the baby's cord and lifted it up to his face. Every man in the tribe had raped the mother at one point or another, and he wanted to see if the child looked anything like him. The cambion looked like a normal child in every way but one. Its eyes were dead, lifeless, like a doll's. Sure, the kid was alive. It wriggled and cried like a normal baby. Those eyes were wide open, though, not scrunched closed like a newborn's eyes should be. Wide open, empty, doll's eyes. If that story is true, I don't blame the tribe for killing the child. Something like that shouldn't exist. Right, I'm done. I have to go. This is the point where people like to have things nicely tied up. A few dragons slain, a few maidens saved. At the very least, you could expect some kind of moral lesson to think over. I think that, in this case, that sort of thing is missing the point. There are no dragons to slay, no morals to learn. We do not live happily ever after. There's no grand revelation, no clever twist, no purpose, no redemption, no hope. There's only eternity among our own kind. Hello. It's been a long time. The last body I had in the living world didn't cope too well with my mind driving it. It's sometimes hard to remember that the lessons you learn in hell aren't a good fit for the civilized world. When murder is just a normal part of existence, you tend to keep doing it out of habit. The inevitable result is either death or exorcism and a trip back to the city of Dis. Safe to say, I got a bit carried away the last time I was here. After my last taste of freedom, I knew that I had to get back out of Dis. My existence ever since I squandered my last host has been utterly dedicated to fighting my way back into a pillar of fire. I had to escape Dis. After what I've seen, I had to escape. This new body seems a little more durable than the last one. Now that I'm back, shall we take another trip into hell? Phlegethon Swamp. It rains in hell. It rains all the fucking time, and that water has to go somewhere. Most of it drains out into Gehenna, where it sinks into the otherworldly ash and apparently disappears. The rest flows either into the sewers beneath the city, or it collects in Phlegethon Swamp. Remember how it's a bad idea to drink the rainwater in hell without boiling it? Well, Phlegethon's water will kill you no matter what you do with it. Even letting the stuff touch your skin can be deadly. You see, the swamp isn't just filled with disease and rot. It's also brimming with chemical waste. One pool might simply be undrinkable, but another might dissolve your flesh. If you're mad enough to travel to Phlegethon, or unlucky enough to be born there, your odds of survival are slim. Phlegethon's waters are inky black, and it's impossible to tell just how deep a pool is by looking. It could be an inch, or it could be a mile. You never know whether or not your next footfall will plunge you into the cloying abyss. Worse still, there are places where the sewers gradually drain the water and create unseen vortices capable of dragging down even the strongest of the damned. To navigate the swamp, you're better off using the crumbled buildings as stepping stones. The corrosive water causes wooden supports to wither and collapse, so there's plenty of debris lying around to stand on. Even so, if you don't take it slow and keep your balance, it's easy to slip and subject yourself to a fucking agonizing death. Last but not least are the wildfires. These are the reason that even the most insane tribes don't try to establish a permanent stronghold in Phlegethon Swamp. All that chemical waste and decaying matter makes the swamp extremely volatile. A lightning strike or buildup of gases can result in immense explosions that ignite Phlegethon's surface for miles around. Wildfires move fast. I guarantee you that you won't outrun one. Cositus, The first time you see Cocytus, you could be forgiven for thinking you'd reach the very edge of Dis. The pit is dozens of miles wide and several times as deep. At some point in the dim and distant past, a fragile alliance of tribes put their slaves to work, digging a quarry. Why they did this is lost to time, but many believe it was an attempt to escape Dis. Perhaps those tribes hoped that if they dug far enough, they'd eventually tunnel their way out of hell. In my view, the more likely answer is that the tribes were looking for resources. If that's true, then the excavation was a success. Miles below the surface, beneath the rock and dirt, there are caverns filled with veins of iron and copper. So far underground and sheltered from the relentless fucking rain, it's far easier to create a fire hot enough to smelt ore. The value of such a position wasn't lost on the tribes, and that alliance soon showed just how brittle it was. After a short but savage burst of treachery, the initial settlers of Cocytus all but wiped themselves out. Since then, the pit has been settled and mined countless times. Coordinated efforts from various tribes have transformed the quarry into an abyss. So far, these alliances have always been broken sooner or later. Cocytus has many paths into its depths, and the lower you go, the more labyrinthine the pit becomes. The sprawling caverns shelter entire shanty towns and crude smelting facilities. Some are abandoned, others have been lost to cave-ins, yet there are still plenty of tribes who fight, join forces, and betray one another over the precious ore veins. By this point, you have to go pretty fucking deep to find an untapped vein, and this is where Cocytus becomes truly deadly. Anybody who thought they might be able to tunnel out of hell would be sorely disappointed once they learn what lies in the depths. In all these years, after digging for so many miles, not one person has run into some magical portal leading out of Dis. They also haven't run into magma for that matter. Instead, the deeper you go, the colder Cocytus becomes. I've never been to the very bottom myself. I'm told that down there, the air is cold enough to freeze your blood and shatter your skin. Maybe that's true. I could certainly believe it. On the rare occasions I've been to Cocytus, I've always had to turn back once the walls became more ice than rock, and the narrow walkways became a death trap. If you have the numbers to do it, Cocytus is still a valuable place to settle. Just remember that when hunger, cold, and greed are your constant companions, none of the damned can be trusted. The Pale Witch. I've told you about the Slaughterman previously, but hell has other legendary figures, each with their own sobriquets. The Ripper, the Grim Doctor, the Tyrant, and many more. So far, I've only encountered one of these figures. During my last stay in hell, I came across the Pale Witch. As is always the case with legends, the truth about the Pale Witch tends to get lost amid the superstition. I've heard plenty of theories as to what she is. The Pale Witch is a Striga who has the power of the evil eye. The Pale Witch is a Gorgon whose gaze turns her victims to stone. The Pale Witch is a succubus who entraps the minds of those she wishes to consume. All of that is bullshit. I've seen the Pale Witch and I know the truth about her. When I first saw her, I didn't realize who I was looking at. She was naked and locked in combat with an armed resident, so I just took her for fresh meat. Here's a tip for you. If you see a resident fighting fresh meat, kill both of them while they're distracted. I planned to do exactly that, but something about the fight seemed off. Residents usually have the upper hand in a fight against fresh meat, and this particular bout definitely seemed about as one-sided as it gets. She was naked, whereas he was clad in leather and bone. She was unarmed, whereas he had a club. She was wayfish, whereas he was huge. Despite him having the advantage, the resident was clearly terrified of her. The rules of hell dictated that he should have cracked her skull, taken her skin, and eaten her flesh, but that just wasn't happening. He was uncoordinated and apparently desperate to escape. Every swing he took was clumsy, and the blows he did manage to land on her didn't seem to have any effect. I could only stare as this naked, vulnerable woman took the resident's club from his unresisting hand and swung it at his knee. I'm accustomed to the sound of bones breaking by now, but this time the noise caught me off guard. How the fuck was this happening? She brought the club down on his other knee, then his elbows, then his ankles, then his shoulders. She left him broken and screaming on the floor. She could have finished him off with a blow to the head, stolen his clothing, and taken her rightful place as a resident. That's how hell works. Those are the rules I've learned through bloody trial and error. That isn't what happened. Rather than kill him, she sat down beside him in the mud and took his hand in hers. I actually thought she was going to console him, until she started breaking his fingers. One by one, she snapped the fingers on both his hands, with a calmness that made no sense to me. Torture is common in hell, but there's always a purpose behind it. The people in Skin Street do it out of sadism, and the people in the boneyard do it for their insane purification rituals. This woman did it without emotion and without reason. I honestly don't know if she even understood that she was hurting him. I don't think her mind works the same way as ours. Eventually, the resident lost consciousness. A man can only take so much pain before the shock gets him. Surely now she'd be satisfied. Surely she'd take his clothes and restore hell's order. Number, she stood up, tilted her head slightly, and uttered a noise for the first time. It wasn't a victory cry, nor was it even a sigh of relief. Instead, the sound she made was nothing more than a faintly bemused It was as if she couldn't comprehend why her plaything had stopped moving. She stood up and stepped away from him, apparently content to leave him alive, unconscious and crippled on the ground. She kept his club, but didn't take his clothing. The cold and rain didn't seem to bother her. Then she looked at me. In that instant, I knew I was looking at the pale witch. I looked into her eyes and I couldn't fucking move. I understood what she was straight away, and the sheer terror of it froze me. The pale witch isn't a striga, she isn't a gorgon, and she isn't a succubus. The pale witch is a cambion. It's hard to put into words exactly how paralyzing the sight of a cambion is. That perfectly serene face and those dead, staring eyes just don't belong on a body that's otherwise human. It was like looking into the face of a mannequin and knowing that it's looking back at you. That noise again. That kind of detached curiosity shouldn't exist in the world of predator and prey. Might makes right, survival of the fittest. Nobody in the city of Dis has any right to make that noise. She took an awkward step towards me, and I saw that her right leg was broken. It seemed that her fight with the resident had injured her after all. She just didn't notice it. She tried to walk normally, completely unaware that one of her legs had an extra joint. I don't care how tough you are. Nobody should be able to put their full weight onto a broken leg without even wincing. She stepped closer, her zombie shuffle steadily closing the gap between us as I stared at her. She raised her club and my survival instincts finally kicked into gear. Her transfixing spell broke just enough for me to stumble backwards and avoid her swing. I ran. I ran from a woman with a broken leg, and I'm not even ashamed of it. Looking back on my experience, there are some things I just can't comprehend. The pale witch is a cambion, I'm certain of it. She was born in hell, and hell is all she's ever known. She also looked to be about 30 years old. That just shouldn't be possible. No baby survives long in Dis. Even if they had a tribe to protect them, there just isn't enough nourishment for an infant to grow into a toddler, let alone an adult. The pale witch is a walking impossibility. Her existence is a defiance of all reason. I would endure every torture the people of Skin Street and the Boneyard could conceive of, if it meant I would never have to look into her eyes again. Something terrible came with the rain. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. One moment I was getting ready for my shift at work, and then the next thing I knew, I got a text for an emergency alert. The text read, "Emergency. Heavy rains with possible floods imminent. Do not leave your home under any circumstances, effective immediately. Lock your doors and cover your windows. Avoid making loud noise or using devices that emit light. If your household members have been outside in the rain, do not let them inside. Await further notice from the authorities." This was weird, to say the least. First off, the weather outside was fine. I was outside just prior to receiving the text, and not a single cloud was in the sky. And then the instructions themselves. They didn't make any sense. Don't let your family members inside if they've been out in the rain. Before I could process that thought properly, I heard drumming of the rain on the roof of my home. I glanced out my window and realized that the previously sunny weather had now turned into a sudden downpour. The drumming I had heard on the roof became louder by the second, until it was the only sound permeating the house. Despite my skepticism at the instructions of the message, I decided to abide by the rules and pull the blinds over my windows, as well as lock my doors. I returned to my living room in order to send my boss a text that I won't be coming to work. But upon my attempt, I realized the message could not be sent. Not only were the services off, but there was no internet either, so I couldn't check what was going on the news. I wanted to turn on the TV, but I remembered what the message said about light-emitting devices. So I did the only thing an internet-deprived person could do at that moment. I took a nap. The rain was loud, but the drumming of it put me to sleep more easily. I woke up some time later, confused and groggy. The battering of the rain hadn't let up. If anything, it was only more violent now. I glanced at my phone and realized it was 5 p.m. Still no service or internet. I got up and went to the kitchen to grab some water. Still half asleep, I poured water into a glass and brought it to my mouth. However, something stopped me before I could take a sip. In addition to the heavy rain outside, I heard a distinctive sound of footsteps splashing in my backyard. It was brief and sounded like someone just ran from one end to another, but it was definitely there. I scanned my backyard through my back door, but it was empty. I was sure I heard footsteps, so I decided to open the door and peek outside. As soon as I did so, the already loud thundering of the rain became even louder, almost sounding like a waterfall was next to me. I stepped forward to the edge of the grass, and right away saw fresh footprints across the lawn. They started from one end of the fence and ended all the way across the lawn on the other side. It was as if someone had jumped over the fence, ran across my backyard, and jumped again into my neighbor's yard. "Hello?" I foolishly called out, looking at my neighbor's fence. No response came back. Of course it didn't. Maybe it was the neighbor's kid who got caught in the rain and decided to hurry back home. I turned around and went back inside, closing the door behind me and somewhat muffling the noise of the rain. I drank the unfinished glass of water and returned to my living room. Just as I was about to sit down, I heard another noise. A group of voices coming from the street. I could barely make them out due to the battering of the rain, but they spoke loudly to each other, so I could just barely hear them. I peeked outside my window and saw a group of armed soldiers standing in the middle of the street in front of my house. They were talking among each other, and from their body language and hand gestures, it was apparent they weren't chatting about everyday mundane activities. I wanted to know what was going on, so against my better judgment, I opened my front door and stepped onto the porch. "Report back after a full sweep," I came outside just in time to catch one of the soldiers shouting. As soon as they noticed me, they pointed their guns at me in unison. "Whoa, don't shoot." I raised my hands instinctively. I just wanted to know what's going on. "Sir, you need to go back inside right now," the soldier at the front, who was shouting orders earlier, said. And then something happened that I cannot comprehend to this day. As the soldiers stood there pointing their guns at me, something flew through the street at an impossible speed and grabbed one of the soldiers at the back, taking him along with it and disappearing out of sight. It all happened in a split second, and all that remained of the soldier was his gun that fell on the ground with a muffled clatter. I felt my hands and jaw slowly drop and my eyes widen as the soldier who was at the front continued barking orders at me. The others seemed oblivious to their squad member's disappearance until one of them glanced to the side and saw the gun on the ground. "Hey, Lieutenant, where's Ramirez?" he asked. The whole group turned towards the gun on the ground and started looking around for the soldier and shouting his name. I wanted to tell them what I saw, but I wasn't even sure of what happened myself. One of the soldiers pointed down the street at something I couldn't see from my porch, and when their whole squad looked in that direction, their look of confusion turned into one of palpable fear. They pointed their guns at whatever was there, and just as I was about to strain my neck to look at what they were so worried about, I was ordered by the lieutenant once more to get inside, this time a lot more violently. I would have ignored the order itself, but the demonic, high-pitched scream that suddenly came from down the street is what caused me to run back inside, lock my door and prop it with my back, while my heart pounded like crazy, even though I had no idea what the fuck was going on. Gunshots were mixed in the air along with the animalistic screeches that now sounded like they were right in my ear. A moment later, both the screaming and the gunshots ceased, and the only thing that remained was the drumming of the rain. My heart was pounding fast, and my thoughts racing 1,000,000 miles per hour. What the hell had just happened? Before I could process that thought entirely, there was a knock on my door. "Sir, you can open the door. It's safe now." It was the lieutenant. Safe from what? I thought to myself. I stood up and stared at the door, holding my breath. "Sir, open the door," the soldier said again. Something didn't seem right in the way he said it, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Sir, if you don't open the door, I will be forced to break in," the lieutenant repeated. There was no intonation in his sentence. It was as if he just read it as a line off a paper. "Sir, I am warning you." His sentence cut off when the sound of gunfire echoed somewhere in the distance. There was a sound of violent splashing footsteps moving away from my door, which I assumed came from the lieutenant. I glanced through the peephole and sure enough, he was gone. But the sight in front of me is what made my heart drop to the pit of my stomach. Strewn about the street in front of my house were the mangled and mutilated dead bodies of the soldiers I had just seen, their blood washed away by the pouring rain. I counted the bodies and my suspicions were correct. The entire group had perished. I felt guilty and stupid for disobeying the alert instructions like that. In my skepticism and lack of understanding, I thought it was a simple rain warning and decided to carelessly move about my property. Now those soldiers were dead and I may have had part of the blame to take. I tried to push that thought out of my head and to figure out what I should do next. I checked my phone again, and there was, of course, still no signal. I made sure my windows were covered properly and turned on the TV. I flipped through the channels, but none of them seemed to work. I quickly turned off the TV out of fear that I'll attract more of whatever the hell was out there. I went to the storage room and fetched my dusty old radio. After putting in the batteries, I turned up the volume and started fiddling with the frequencies. Static, static, static. No, wait. There was something on one of the frequencies. Along with static, there were voices in the background just barely audible, I adjusted the radio wheel until I could hear the voices more clearly. From HQ? One of the voices said. Negative. Sweeping, until we go. The other voice responded. Go back aft. This? Voice 1 asked. At this point, the voices became a lot clearer. Yeah. HQ ordered a retreat and they'll cordon off the city. Voice 2 responded. Wait, what about search and rescue? Voice 1 asked. Fuck that. This whole fucking town's a mess as it is. HQ said there's not going to be any more rescue attempts. Voice 2 replied. So, 36 got way out of hand, huh? Voice 1 asked. Yep, it's not our problem anymore. Any survivors on your end? Voice 2 said. A couple, but they already saw too much. Had to dispose of them. Copy that. Once you're due. Bisu. Back. Base. The voices started to cut off again bit by bit, and then they went silent completely, leaving me only with static. What the hell was that all about? What was 36? And what did they mean they had to dispose of the survivors, and that there would be no rescue? Something was definitely very wrong here, and it was clear that the army knew something that us, the civilians, didn't. One thing was for sure, though. I had to get out of town. I couldn't wait for rescue, which wouldn't even come. Being out there with hostile soldiers, or even worse, those things that wiped out the soldiers didn't put my mind at ease, but I had no other choice. I went upstairs and packed my bag. I put in a pair of clothes, because I knew I'd probably be drenched from the rain. I also packed a flashlight and some food and water. I peeked out my bedroom window and saw that the downpour was finally showing signs of subsiding. The streets were completely empty, save for the dead soldiers. From here I could see across from my house that my neighbor's door was left open, allowing the wind and rain to seep inside. I tried not to think about what might have happened there, and I had no intention of finding out. I put on my backpack and approached the stairs. Not 3 steps down, I heard something coming from the radio. Along with the static, there was the sound of slow wheezing. I quickly went down and grabbed the radio, putting my ear against it to hear the sound better. I tried adjusting the frequency, but no matter how much I did, nothing changed, and the static and wheezing remained the same. Frustrated, I figured the radio was broken and turned it off. But the static and wheezing didn't stop. And then, I saw something with the corner of my eye that made my blood run cold. Mud tracks. They were all over my carpet, coming in from the kitchen and leading to the corner of my room. I froze in place, listening as the radio static and wheezing permeated the room. After what seemed like forever, I broke out of my trance and looked towards the corner. The first thing I saw were bony feet caked with mud. As I slowly moved my gaze up, I realized I was staring at a crouched, emaciated figure which faced the corner of my room, but I couldn't tell its features due to the dark. With extremely trembling hands, I pointed my flashlight to the corner and flicked it on. A tiny, completely nude, and emaciated humanoid creature that I could only describe as a human-like goblin came into light. Its spine was pronounced against its tight skin on the back so much that I could count the vertebrae. Its limbs looked like they had no meat on them whatsoever and could barely hold its fragile frame. As soon as the flashlight illuminated the creature, it jerked its head towards me with mouth wide open and scared eyes. The radio static and wheezing got much louder, and it was just then that I realized the sound was not coming from my radio. It was all I could take. I turned around and bolted out of there and into the rain, which had now turned into a drizzle, not even bothering to close my front door. I ran down the street, occasionally looking behind me to see if the goblin creature would come chasing me. My sprint slowed down to a jog, and eventually I stopped and looked back towards my house, leaning on my knees and panting, listening to the sound of rain around me. I breathed a sigh of relief momentarily. and then I heard a blood-curdling scream behind me. I turned around and saw a young man who was covered in wounds all over, crawling towards me with anger in his eyes and bloodlust I had never seen in anyone before. As he got closer, I realized he was missing both legs in what looked like a terrible accident, leaving only 2 mangled stumps. But that didn't stop him from closing in on me. I started running again, and it was just then that I realized how much the streets were actually not empty. I saw dead bodies of both civilians and soldiers. I saw crashed vehicles and more corpse-looking people crawling out despite their fatal injuries. I saw amalgamations of creatures I cannot describe in words, roaming about the streets or lying dead along with the soldiers, their dark blood staining the ground beneath them. I looked back and saw that despite my running speed, the legless man was still close behind me. I turned right and ran across the lawn, climbing over the fence and into a backyard. I stopped and stared at the fence, figuring I was safe. There was no way the crawling man could reach me here. But a second later, the he came crawling over the fence, still screaming at the top of his lungs. I started backpedaling, but slipped and fell on my back. The legless man lunged at me from a distance that would make an Olympic athlete envious. But before he could fall on top of me, he fell backwards on the grass with a loud bang. I looked to my right and saw an elderly man pointing a shotgun at the attacker. The legless man got right back up and started crawling again, until the man blasted him one more time. This time, the crawler fell backwards and writhed on the floor with a scream impossible to be made by humans, before completely ceasing all movement and noise, and I was left with nothing but the sound of rain again. And then the old man cocked his shotgun once more. I looked up at him and saw that he had it trained on me, and the way his knuckles had turned white, I knew he was ready to shoot me right there. "Wait, don't shoot. I'm not one of them." I raised one hand, still sitting on the ground. "Prove it," he said with a rough voice. "What do you mean, prove it?" "I'm talking to you, aren't I scoffed. "That don't mean shit." He spat on the ground. "Look, I just left my home minutes ago because of all the crazy shit that's happening. I have no idea what's going on, I swear," I recited in one breath. He didn't budge for a while, the expression on his face looking like he was weighing his options. Finally, after a moment of contemplation, lowered the gun down and gave me his hand, saying, "You'll catch a cold out here, son. Let's get you inside." A young woman in cargo pants with a gun in her hand opened the back door of the old man's house. When she saw us, she stepped aside and let us in, while carefully eyeing me. "Take your damn shoes off," the old man said. "Don't want you tracking no mud inside." "Dad, no. He might need to run out quickly in case they get inside," the girl said. "Fine." The man grunted and proceeded into the living room, leaning his shotgun on the sofa where he sat. "Make yourself at home," the girl said. "But don't try anything stupid." She went past me and inside the living room. Everything about her confidence in verbal and body language told me she was trained for this exact type of situation, but I didn't want to ask her anything yet. I joined them in the living room and sat opposite of the old man. "Name's Harry," he said as he lit a cigarette. "And this here is my daughter Alyssa." I introduced myself as the old man kept staring at me silently. I couldn't decipher any emotions on the old man's face. "You live close by, don't you?" Harry asked. "Yeah, a few blocks away. That creature made me get into your backyard. I didn't mean to trespass," I said. "Are you headed to the hospital?" Alyssa asked. "No, why?" I shook my head. "Some survivors gathering up there. Said so on the news before they stopped broadcasting. They're probably still there, though," Harry said. "Harry, do you know anything about what's going on?" I leaned forward. "Devil's work, I tell you," Harry responded nonchalantly. Ever since they started mining 2 years ago, I kept telling them something would go wrong. Dad, come on, not this again. Alyssa rolled her eyes. Harry simply ignored her and continued. It ain't natural to go digging into the earth. Wasn't meant for no humans. I can bet you they woke something up down there at the quarry. So, do you know if the military has any plans for a rescue mission? I pretended not to know. I also wanted to know if Alyssa was with the army and hoped I would get my answer this way. Something told me that if she was with military, I'd already be dead. Ain't no military coming to save us, son, Harry said. Saw them retreating with their armored vehicles, and Alyssa here saw them shooting civilians on sight. Alyssa nodded. So you're not military? I asked her directly. Ex, she responded. I nodded and then said, so I guess our best bet is to go to the hospital, I finally said. Alyssa nodded. You could go there and wait it out, Harry said. Or find the survivors there and use numbers to bust your way out of town. Hospital's close by, but there may be some of those monsters roaming around, Alyssa said. Just after a few minutes of talking to her, I could see a resemblance to her father, despite her not being as stubborn as Harry. I nodded, and we sat in silence for a moment. Do you know anything about 36? I heard them talking over the radio about 36 getting out of hand. I finally asked. They both seemed confused, but before they could give a proper response, there was a sound of glass breaking in the kitchen, followed by a gurgling noise. Harry shot up and grabbed his shotgun, while Alyssa pointed her handgun at the doorway. I saw a hatchet leaning on the side of the fireplace, so I grabbed it and got ready for whatever was coming. A moment later, the gurgling got louder, and a man that looked completely charred, as if he was burnt all over, shambled inside. When he saw us, his gurgling turned into a painful scream, which were cut short with Alyssa's bullet to his head. Another sound of glass breaking, this time behind us, and another charred person, a woman, jumped inside, completely ignoring the deep cuts on her body from the broken window. She started crawling towards me, and when she grabbed onto my foot, something kick-started my fight or flight instinct. I raised the hatchet above my head and brought it down with full force on the woman. The blade struck the top of the woman's skull, making her stop moving completely. I didn't have time to react, as another charred person stumbled in through the window, this one having patches of blazing skin on his body. I pulled the hatchet out of the woman's skull, but the man managed to grab my hand before I could swing again. A loud bang resounded, and the man fell dead from another one of Alyssa's bullets. More of them kept coming in, and the room turned into a cacophony of gunshots, and Harry's, "Come on, you ugly sons of bitches," shouts. I managed to bring down one more charred creature with the hatchet, and as I turned around, I saw that one of them tackled Alyssa to the ground and thrashed violently, while she tried to free her hand of his grip and shoot him. I swung the hatchet as hard as I could, embedding it in the attacker's collarbone. He screamed an inhuman scream and fell backwards when I pulled out the blade. He started scooting back with his heels, holding his bleeding shoulder. But by this point, adrenaline took over my actions completely, so I had no intention of stopping. I gripped the hatchet with both hands and brought it down on the creature over and over, first severing one of his arms at the forearm, and then finally killing him with a strike to the face. Just then, I realized everything was quiet again. No gunshots, no gurgling, no swearing on Harry's end. Just the sound of our panting. "I owe you." Alyssa patted me on the shoulder as she stood up. "Bet you're thankful now you didn't have to take off your shoes." "These goddamn fuckers," Harry cursed as he reloaded his shotgun. "You can't stay here any longer, kids. Get to the hospital." "Wait, what about you?" Alyssa interjected. "I ain't leaving our home behind." "Don't be stupid, Dad. If you stay here, you'll die. I promised your mama that this would always be our home. I'm not letting these hellspawn take it away from us. He could see the disapproval in Alyssa's eyes, so he put his hand on her cheek and said, I know you're worried, baby girl, but I'll be fine. I have enough food and water to last me here for a month, and the basement is the safest place in town right now. But you need to get yourselves out of here. You understand? Hesitantly, she nodded and put her already packed backpack on. She and I went to the front door, and Harry escorted us there. It was dark already outside, but the rain still wouldn't let up. Now remember what we talked about, he said. If the rain gets too heavy, you find cover immediately, you hear? That's when the nasty ones come out. He looked at me and shoved a handgun into my hands. You keep my daughter safe, you hear? You keep her safe. I looked at the gun and nodded. I never used a gun before, but now it seems I would have to if I wanted to survive. Harry and Alyssa hugged tightly for a long moment, with Harry whispering that he loved her, before she broke away hesitantly and turned around. Come on, let's go, she told me and walked down to the pavement. Thank you, Harry, for saving my life, I said and gave him one last look. For the first time in the short time that I knew him, I thought I finally saw an emotion on his face, an emotion which didn't suit him in the slightest. Despair. I expected Alyssa's mood to change drastically after leaving Harry behind, but she was as focused on surviving now as she was prior to that. The streets were way emptier now than they were when I first ran outside my house. We walked in the middle of the road to avoid getting jumped from the corner, even though we knew it was equally risky exposing ourselves like that. Whenever we heard an inhuman sound in the distance, Alyssa made us stop until we were sure we weren't in any danger. Walking in the rain gave us some cover, which allowed us to move relatively faster, but we still had to be careful. Wait, I whispered to Alyssa, pointing down the street. See that? There was a little girl a few hundred yards away from us, standing in the middle of the road, facing away from us. My initial instinct was to go and see if she was okay, but based on everything I'd seen by that point, I knew there was a high probability that this wasn't a little girl in distress at all. I was right, because as soon as Alyssa saw her, she cursed under her breath and pulled me aside behind a bush. What's wrong? I asked. Whatever you see there, that's not a little girl. Alyssa peeked behind the bush where we hid. Saw her, or someone resembling her, a bit earlier. She stood exactly like that, and when a guy approached to help her during the chaos, she turned around and she had no fucking eyes or nose. Instead, her entire face was replaced by a big fucking vertical line for a mouth with sharp fucking teeth. The poor guy never stood a chance. So what do we do? I asked. Let's try a different street, she suggested. We sneaked through a backyard, ignoring the dead bodies along the way, and went through the adjacent street. Halfway through, I heard a pained groan coming from a dark alley to my left. I readied my hatchet, while Alyssa readied her gun. A creature crawled out into the light, barely able to pull its own weight with what was left of its human-looking arm. The thing looked like a swollen blob in its shape, barely recognizable where the head was, which I could only tell from the eye visible under the heavily swollen blisters. Some of the blisters looked volatile, pulsating under the streetlight, looking like they would pop on the slightest touch. I tried not to think about whether it used to be human, as it pathetically dragged itself towards us, groaning through the small slit of a mouth, the one visible eye wide open and darting from Alyssa to me intermittently. Leave it, Alyssa said. It's harmless unless it manages to grab you. I've seen one earlier. She holstered her gun and urged me to follow her. I gave the amalgamation of the creature one last glance before following my partner. What exactly have you seen, Alyssa? I asked while walking behind her. She was silent for a moment before responding. I got caught in the downpour while heading home. It was like a war zone. Military killing everything. Monsters of all shapes and sizes killing everything. And civilians just trying to escape. I didn't stick around to find out, since the heavy rain brought some really bad monsters. Wait, look. I pointed to a graffiti on a billboard. It said, 36 will save us. You mentioned it before, right? Alyssa asked. What is it? I don't know. Heard the military talking about it over the radio. Whoever or whatever it is, it's responsible for all the crazy shit happening in town. We walked in silence for the rest of the way until we reached the hospital. It's a good thing too, because the rain started to get heavier by the time we reached the entrance. There were no monsters in front, but when we entered, our hearts dropped at the amount of dead bodies at the front desk, both human and otherwise. Shit. Alyssa cursed quietly and readied her gun. This was a bad idea. We should get out of here, I said. As if a higher force heard me, it started raining cats and dogs again, so going outside at this point was impossible. Let's proceed carefully, Alyssa said. Maybe they barricaded themselves somewhere upstairs. We got past the reception, carefully stepping around the dead bodies. The hospital wasn't big, so we figured we'd check it out quickly enough. The elevator was completely demolished, so that was out of the question. Really, though, it looked as if a truck drove into it, bending the door inward all the way to the backside. We climbed the stairs to the second floor, and as soon as we did, the air became heavy. It's hard to explain, but it was as if someone had been keeping all the windows shut for a long time, making the room stuffy. There were no dead bodies, but the place was chaotic, stretchers and trash bins knocked over, etc. Let's split up to check each side separately, Alyssa said when we reached the end of the corridor. I'll check the patient rooms on this side. You check that one. Let's meet up here once we're done, and if you see anything, scream. I wasn't exactly happy at the thought of roaming this place alone, but I hesitantly nodded, and we split up. All the other rooms were empty, just like the rest of the floor. It didn't make sense, but the only possible outcome was that the survivors probably barricaded themselves on the third floor. I came back to the meeting point, and then I heard Alyssa calling me from around the corner. Hey, come check this out, she said from one of the rooms. Coming, I said and followed her voice. Just when I was about to open the door, I felt a firm grip on my left hand. I jerked my head in that direction and saw Alyssa holding my wrist, shaking her head with a worried look on her face. Don't, that's not me, she whispered with a trembling voice. My mind couldn't process what I was looking at. I stared at her, and then back at the door. Hey, you still there? Alyssa's voice came from the room again, followed by an approaching set of footsteps. Come on. The Alyssa, still holding my wrist, pulled me into one of the adjacent rooms, where we quickly hid inside the locker. Quiet now, she whispered. A second later, the door opened, and through the cracks, I saw Alyssa walking in and looking around. Damn it! Where'd he go? She mumbled and turned around to leave the room. Just then, I felt the grip on my wrist tighten even more. I looked down, and in the dark, I saw the hand holding it. But it wasn't Alyssa's hand. The fingers which held me were bony and elongated. I looked to my left and saw not Alyssa, but a bald old man who looked like his life was way overdue by 100 years. I felt Emung blood run cold, and when I tried screaming, I was unable to, so I instead burst through the locker, falling on my shoulder painfully. I got up and ran outside just in time to see Alyssa pointing her gun at me. Run! I shouted, and saw her looking over my shoulder before she bolted out of the room with me. We ran to the stairs and up on the third floor, making our way past the dozens of bodies of patients, staff members, monsters, etc. A realization raced through my mind that there were no survivors, and as we reached a dead end, blocked by a makeshift barricade, we turned around to see if the old man followed us. A second later, he climbed the stairs, striding menacingly towards us. At this point, the lights started flickering, and every time they would go off and come back on, the man was much closer. Alyssa started shooting, but it was as if every time she fired a bullet, the lights would go out for a split second, and the man would appear in a different spot, always a step closer. And then he finally reached us, but instead of attacking us, he simply went past us. We followed him with our gaze, and the lights went out again, but this time they didn't come back on. There were sounds of loud crashing and objects being thrown, at some moments right next to me. When the lights finally did come back after almost a whole minute, the barricade behind us was completely ransacked and the way clear. The old man was nowhere to be seen. I looked around at all the dead bodies of monsters around me and inspected the identical tattoos they all had on their wrists, or whatever extensions of extremities they had. The same tattoo I saw on the old man's wrist when he held me in the locker, a simple 2-digit number, 36. We didn't have time to think about the monsters branded with the number 36 because a sound came from behind us, from the place where the barricade had previously been. We proceeded carefully, past more dead bodies, and then something small ran past us in the dark. Alyssa gestured for me to follow her, so I did. There was nothing around the corner, but we still proceeded carefully. Whoever Jut ran past us was close by. Another barely audible sound, coming from right behind a wheelchair in front of us. Alyssa slowly approached it, and then kicked the wheelchair aside. A small boy came into visibility. He screamed and ran past us before we could grab him. "Hey, wait! We want to help you!" I shouted after him, but he didn't listen. He disappeared into one of the rooms, and Alyssa and I wasted no time running after him. "Little boy, where are you?" Alyssa frantically looked around the room. A minute after searching, we found him under a patient's bed. I shone my flashlight and saw his terrified face. He was no older than 6, and he looked like he had seen more than enough for the next 20 years. "It's okay. We won't hurt you." I knelt down slowly, holding my hand in front of myself. He was panting and his eyes were wide. "Hey, what's your name?" I asked. He still didn't answer. "My name's Alyssa." Alyssa introduced herself behind me. "Where are your parents?" The kid's eyes widened even more, and he started backing away. It took me a moment to realize it was not we who scared him. A faint grunting sound came from behind us, and as soon as I turned around, I saw another one of those blobby amalgamations, like the one in the alley, tackling Alyssa to the ground. She held it back with her foot, trying to wiggle out of its reach. I gripped my hatchet firmly and thought for a second about what I should do. Just like the one before, the creature looked very volatile, and I didn't know how dangerous getting close could be. But when I saw how dangerously close it was to reaching Alyssa's face with its deformed fingers, I brought down the hatchet on its back with full force. There was a loud popping sound, and I fell back as something warm and slimy hit my face with unimaginable force. I swiped my hand across the goo on my face and spat it out of my mouth. "Hey, you okay?" Alyssa helped me up. "Disgusting." I spat out the rest of the slime from my mouth and cleaned myself off. The monster lay dead sideways on the floor, its back ripped open. "Just find the damn kid." I pushed Alyssa away, still disgusted. I heard her trying to talk to the boy, and little by little, he finally came to trust us and let us approach him. "What's your name?" Alyssa asked. "Dewey," he shyly said, looking at his feet. "Are your parents close by, Dewey?" Alyssa asked him. The kid's face turned red and his eyes glossy. Alyssa hugged him while he cried. A few minutes later, when he calmed down, She pulled back and asked him, "Dewey, how did you get here? Where are the others?" "My mom and dad and I came here, but there was a fight." "The monsters killed them?" Alyssa asked. Dewey shook his head. "There was a man in black clothes. He and some other people said 36 is good, and other people said 36 is bad, and then they got into a fight. So the man in black and his men killed everyone, including your parents." Alyssa frowned. Dewey nodded. "Do you know this man's name?" "Martin." "Did they say where they would go?" I asked. "Dad said they couldn't leave the city because the soldiers were bad, so they planned to go to the old mine, where 36 was. But when Dad said they had to get rid of 36, Martin got angry, and that's when he attacked everyone." "The old mine? Why would they go there?" Alyssa asked. "Hey, maybe your father was onto something after all." I smiled. "What else do you remember, Dewey?" Dewey thought for a moment. "Martin told me I could be saved if I went with him, but I didn't want to go. A bad man who was there wanted to hurt me, but Martin said no. So they went there. There really might be something there." I said, "Dewey, how many men were with Martin?" Dewey counted on his fingers for a moment before responding with a simple 6. "If we take them by surprise, we can take all of them," I said. Alyssa looked uncertain, so I said, "Look, chances are all exits out of town are heavily guarded by military, but if we can get to the bottom of this whole thing, we may be able to undo some of the damage and maybe even survive." She nodded and looked at the kid. "Dewey, you'll have to come with us. We'll keep you safe." By the time we got out, the rain was a mere drizzle again. Since the mine was on the other side of town, we took the closest functioning car we could find. To hell with the noise and monsters. I let Alyssa drive. Although we saw monsters on the road, most of them didn't seem to care about us. They'd glance at us and then continue roaming mindlessly, as if they knew they couldn't catch us in the car. "You okay, Alyssa?" I asked when she got really quiet. Dewey was sleeping in the back by this point. "Yeah," she said. "Just thinking about my dad. You know he used to take me to this park right here every weekend when I was a kid." "Oh, Harry didn't seem like the gentle type." I smiled. "He wasn't." She smiled back. "We'd do military drills there while everyone else played." "You wanted to be a soldier ever since you were a kid?" "Yeah, and I enjoyed every second of it. You know, one time when he wasn't looking during training, I sat on the swing, just for fun, to take a break. Not a minute later, I fell off and hurt myself. He saw me, and when he approached me, he said, 'Baby girl, while you're having fun there, your enemies are training hard, and you're making it that much easier for them to kill you in combat. There's time for fun, but it's not now, because while you're doing something, you need to do it with complete dedication.' It helped me during boot camp, and after Mom passed. He said it's what helped keep him alive in war, too. I wonder if this is a little too much for him, though. Harry's tough. He could take down a whole horde of those creatures." I said. After a moment of silence, I spoke up again. "You know my father was never around. Always worked hard to provide for us. Whenever I asked to spend time with him, he said, 'I'll thank him one day for always being busy.' And then he died, and I never thanked him for it. I didn't care about his money. I just wanted him to spend time with me. And I never got that." "Seems we both got polar opposites," Alyssa said. "Yeah, you know this one time he—" I started coughing. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, probably just caught a damn cold from this rain," I said, clearing my throat. "Well, don't go getting a fever on me now. We're here," she said. She pulled over in front of a huge, fenced-off area which led to the quarry. "This place is huge," she said. "Where do we even start?" "I think I got an idea," I said, pointing to one of the signs on the fence. There was an arrow pointing to the right side, and it said, "Site 36 this way." "You should probably stay with Dewey while I scout ahead," I told Alyssa. "No way." She disagreed before I even finished my sentence. "You'll need my help taking Martin's men down." "Listen, I'm just gonna go and check." My sentence was abruptly cut off by a sudden cough. "I'm gonna cough, scout, and cough. Come back, cough. Soon. Hey, you okay?" Alyssa looked at me suspiciously. "I'm fine," I said and cleared my aching throat. "What's going on?" Dewey said groggily. "Sorry to wake you up there, buddy," I said. "Listen," Alyssa softly said. "We're gonna go find the bad men. We need you to stay here, okay?" Dewey was less than enthused by this, so Alyssa went on to explain why we needed him to stay quietly in the car while we checked out the mine. After a few minutes of convincing, he finally agreed when Alyssa told him that his job is to keep the car safe, deeming it as an extremely important task. "We'll be back soon, okay?" I told him, and smiled reassuringly. As soon as we closed the car doors behind us, Alyssa took point and carefully proceeded on the old dirt road leading to the quarry. The place seemed to be deserted, not counting the dozens of dead bodies of both humans and monsters. The rain still wasn't letting up, and my guess was it wouldn't for a long, long time. We followed the arrow signs to 36 until we started hearing faint noises in the distance. The cacophony of screams, growls, and moans was definitely coming from numerous monsters, but we couldn't see in the dark where they were. We followed the only remaining path to Site 36, with the noise getting louder and louder. We finally reached an opening, and it didn't take us long to realize we were at the edge of the quarry itself. The noise was coming from the direct center, and when we looked in that direction, we gasped. Hundreds, no, thousands of monsters were converging atop each other, like a huge swarming pile. Monsters of all shapes and forms, forming a nightmarish abomination of a mountain. Although a lot of the stray ones looked in our direction, they didn't seem concerned about us, but we tried not to make any sudden moves nevertheless. "Look, entrance 36. Alyssa pointed at the distance. "Looks like we have to go around them." I said, "I don't think they'll hurt us, but let's be really careful and keep our distance." I took point this time, and just as I predicted, the monsters weren't aggressive, despite making eye contact with us. Still, we proceeded carefully around the horde, keeping as far away as we could from the big pile. The mountain of monsters was a lot bigger and louder than I thought when we got closer to it, and it became clear that the monsters were constantly falling and climbing and falling, over and over and over. Entering the dark mine labeled as 36 felt claustrophobic, but also relieving to leave the army of monsters behind. "Carefully," Alyssa whispered, pointing her torch in front of us. The mine was pretty straightforward, and we ran into no trouble until we heard the voices, that is. "Wait, you hear that?" I perked up my ears. "Bring him forward." A deep voice echoed through the mine. "No, please, I never questioned you, Father, please." Another voice pleaded. Alyssa and I peeked around the corner and saw a group of men standing in an open area in front of a big tunnel. Two of the men were tightly holding a third one, who was struggling. "You have sinned, my child, but you can still be saved," the deep voice said again. It was a priest. That was definitely Martin. "Father, please," the man pleaded, but before he could say anything more, Martin slid a shiny blade across his throat. The man fell over with a gurgling sound, clawing at his throat and bleeding to death within seconds. Martin raised his arms high up and shouted, "Glory be to 36, Savior of our world." The men around him did the same. I counted the men surrounding him. Aside from Martin, there were 4 other men, all of them armed with assault rifles. "We can take them," Alyssa whispered. I nodded, and just as we were about to jump out and start shooting, another voice shouted, "Father Martin, we found an intruder outside our holy grounds. He's the one from the hospital." Father Martin looked down at the new prisoner and chuckled, before saying, "Well now, it would seem you changed your mind about coming here. Have you not, Dewey?" My heart jumped into my throat when I glanced there and realized they had a little boy as a prisoner. Dewey stared at Martin, visibly frightened, but not wanting to show it to the priest. "Luckily, we have just the job for you in a few days," Martin continued. "Take him to the source. Lock him up and keep a close eye on him." Before I realized what was going on, Alyssa jumped in front of our enemies and started shooting them with an expression of pure anger on her face. Without any time to think, I joined in, and in the frenzied shootout we managed to take down all but one of Martin's men, who fled into the dark tunnel ahead. My shoulder got grazed by a bullet in the shootout, but I was not seriously injured. "Martin, come out, you bastard!" Alyssa took a few steps forward cautiously. Out of nowhere, he jumped out and shot Alyssa in the leg, while standing behind Dewey, pointing a gun to his head. "Not a step closer, or the child dies," Martin said. I held my gun trained on him, not sure what I should do. "Shoot him," Alyssa shouted. I would have done it too, but all of a sudden my vision became blurry and I got dizzy, coughing violently. I felt myself falling to my knees and saw blood coming out of my mouth with each cough. Everything was getting dark. "Father Martin, are you okay?" More men rushed to Martin's side, pointing their guns at Alyssa and me. "Should we throw them in the pit?" one of them asked. "No," Martin said while standing over me. "They're as good as dead anyway." The next few hours were blurry. I fell in and out of consciousness, and I remember seeing an unfamiliar face, a scientist of some sort. I felt being carried, and I remember seeing a bright room. Sometime later, I woke up. It took me a while to adjust, but when I did, I shielded my eyes from the bright ceiling light. I looked around and realized I was in some sort of lab. A man in a white coat sat on the other side of the room by a PC typing away. Various vials and incubators of sorts with unfamiliar organs were on the desks around the room. I shuffled on the bed and started coughing violently. "Breathe, breathe." The man in white coat was next to me before I even knew it. "Who are you?" I asked. "My name is Dr. Andrew. I work in this lab." "Lab?" An electronic door opened and a woman with a crutch waltzed in. "Finally awake." Alyssa smiled. Her leg was wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage where she had been shot. "Alyssa, what happened?" "They took Dewey. I think they planned to sacrifice him. Dr. Andrew saw us on the surveillance cameras and took us into the lab. The government had this whole underground facility set up to study 36. Where's the kid now?" I asked. "They took him all the way deep into the heart of 36. Andrew said, "To where the monsters are emerging from. Then we need to go save him." I stood up on wobbly legs, trying to steady myself. Alyssa sat down with a serious expression on her face. The doc stared at me with concern too. "What?" I asked. "There's something you should know." Alyssa looked down. "Back when you saved me in the hospital, when you killed that volatile creature." There was a long pause. "Well, what is it?" My heart was racing and my body trembling. "I'm afraid you're infected," Andrew finally spoke up. "The good news is it's not contagious, and it doesn't turn you into one of those creatures. It seems to be a new form of bacteria which we've never seen before. So here comes the bad news. Once infected, the bacteria attaches itself to the lungs of the host and… Save the bullshit, Doc, I said quietly. How long do I have? It's hard to say. Judging by the progress of the bacteria, I'd say less than a week. I chuckled, unable to process what I was hearing. After a long pause, I said, You said they took Dewey all the way deep, right? Alyssa interjected. You can't be serious, you can't. I'm the only one who can save him, damn it. I tried not to yell too much since my chest was burning. You can't do it with that leg of yours, so it has to be me. I have to do this one last thing, before I die. Although the lab was enormous and had lots of staff, Andrew was the only one who managed to survive. He explained when the alarm went off, all military personnel went to secure the source on Site 36, but perished. Andrew had no choice but to initiate full lockdown. So what exactly is 36? I asked. Well, Andrew started. It all began as an accident. Some miners were going about their business, and one day they dug through to this hidden cave system, so to say, which further led down to a huge, seemingly bottomless hole. Now at first, it was just an interesting tourist attraction, but then people reported hearing voices coming from down there. And then the first accident happened. You remember that little girl that disappeared a few years back? Katie Chandler, Alyssa interjected. Yeah. The official story was she just went missing during a field trip to the cave with her school. But in reality, she fell down the hole. Well, dragged down is more accurate. Wait, the teacher who took the class on the field trip claimed there was no way she fell inside the hole, I said. Andrew nodded. Yeah. As soon as the incident happened, the teacher was bribed and threatened by the government. The kids' stories of monsters were, of course, dismissed. We had our eyes on this place for a while as a precaution, but only after we saw Katie getting dragged down were our suspicions confirmed. After that, the military quarantined the zone. Our lab was set up here, and we have been studying the hole ever since. The public was told the area was closed off due to police searching for the missing girl. But something went wrong? Alyssa asked. Monsters occasionally kept emerging from the cave. We tried investigating the hole, but it was impossible. It was as if a completely different world was down there. And then they stopped coming out altogether. But the government wanted to know more about them, so they set up a special machine to draw them out. What? They created a link with the world down there via a machine. Let's call it a portal. But they underestimated the monsters, and soon thousands of them poured out of the portal and were set loose on the city. So what about the rain? Interestingly enough, as the rain increases, so does the activity in the portal. We still don't know how they are connected, but one thing is for sure. The heavier the rain, the more dangerous they are. Doc, on our way here, the creatures outside were merging onto a big pile and they weren't hostile towards us, I said. Yes. The creatures seem to be operating in hive-like mind manner, and whatever is controlling them seems to be coming from the source, the portal. We believe they have a queen or something of the like. So how do we stop them? Your best bet is to destroy the machine. It's very fragile, so a few bullets should do it. But that still leaves the monsters outside, Alyssa said. Andrew nodded. Yes. And if the machine is destroyed, there may be a number of residual monsters coming out of the hole, the ones that manage to get into our world before the connection is severed. And chances are the government will either nuke the city to prevent it from spreading. But if we close the portal, the monsters may get confused without the connection to their leader. I can then contact HQ, and they may conduct a full sweep and rescue mission. What are those creatures anyway? I asked. Well, we don't know exactly. Our research team believes they were dormant for centuries, and those miners woke them up when they dug up their sanctuary. We studied a few specimens, but we still barely know anything about them. There was a long silence. Well, time for me to go. I stood up. Wait, take this. Andrew went to his desk and returned with a box of pills. It will suppress the bacteria, but only for a very short time. Take one every hour and no sooner. This strain is highly adaptive and can develop resistance within days. Thanks, Doc. My mind was on autopilot, and I tried not to think about the fact that my time on this earth was limited. Alyssa stood up with the help of her crutch and opened her mouth to say something, but I could tell she had no idea what to say. There was nothing she could say to ease the situation. Don't worry, I said. I'll bring him back, and then you need to keep him safe. I will. I promise, she said with glossy eyes. I coughed painfully and then said to her, You know, I planned on asking you out on a date once this was all done. Despite being a stubborn bitch, I think we'd get along. If you weren't so ugly, I'd say yes, she said, and we both laughed. I stared at the ground and then looked her in the eye. If I'm not back soon, you'll have to go on alone. She didn't respond. The doctor escorted me out of the lab. He gave me an assault rifle which belonged to one of the soldiers and told me how to reach the source where the machine was. The lab itself was hidden behind a fake wall which could be raised and lowered, so that explained how the doc stayed safe this whole time. I stepped outside and turned back to the doctor. If you make it back, I'll see you on the camera feed and open the passage for you. Good luck, Andrew said, and pushed a button which lowered the fake wall back down, leaving me in the empty mine. Hold on, Dewey, I said to myself and started walking. I soon reached the area where we first saw Father Martin, and from there I went inside the dark tunnel ahead. It slowly descended, and as it did, the air got colder, until I could see my breath in the air. After I started having a coughing fit, I popped one of the pills and continued, trying to steady my breathing. I felt fatigue taking me over, so I knew I was almost out of time. When I descended to the bottom, I started seeing lights from torches on the walls. As I continued, the rock walls and floor changed into a metallic corridor. I followed the only path ahead of me until I heard voices in front. It was a mixture of adult and child voices. I hurried up and saw in front of me a huge area with a tall ceiling and an enormous hole in the ground. The hole was glowing brightly and looked like it had a sort of whirlpool in it. On the other side of it was a big generator-like machine. This was definitely the place I was looking for. I arrived just in time to see Martin and his man throw a woman into the hole. Her scream was abruptly cut off when she fell inside the vortex, which became turbulent before calming down again. Praise be to 36. Martin raised his arms and shouted. The men around him repeated the phrase 3 more times. Now, Dewey. Martin turned towards the kid. Your role is at hand. You will perform a great deed here. Fuck you. Dewey spewed at Martin, making him and few other men chuckle. Come now. Martin pushed Dewey towards the hole and stepped back. Dewey fell near the edge on his hands and knees and stared at the vortex, which started to become violent again. I aimed my gun at the generator. It was far away, but I was confident I could hit it. Black tentacles started to emerge from the hole and slithered their way towards Dewey, as a deep groan echoed from the hole itself all around the cave. Without any time to think, I pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the machine with a loud clank, and the sound of electrical shocks filled the air. The vortex in the hole disappeared just like that, and the tentacles writhed, severed on the ground, purple blood oozing out of them. The deep groan from before turned into a scream of agony, and the cave began to shake. No! What did you do? Martin shouted. Multiple screams came from the now dark hole and monsters started to emerge. They wasted no time pulling Martin's men into the hole or slaughtering them on sight. Most of his men had already escaped. Some deeper into the cave and others ran past me, ignoring me in their panic. "Come back, you cowards," Martin shouted as screams echoed around him. "Dewey, come on!" I shouted in the whole mess, and the boy started running towards me. A thin creature with sharp claws and teeth pursued him on all fours, and just as it leapt to grab him, I shot the creature and knocked it backwards. I didn't move again. "Come on!" I pushed Dewey forward, and we both ran as quickly as our legs and the shaking ground allowed us to. We ran unsteadily through the tremors, and I heard cave-ins behind us. My chest was on fire, and I was already out of breath. "Dewey, run!" I said between breaths and continued staggering. And then I felt a powerful force knock the air out of me. I dropped the gun and fell on my side. "You'll pay for that," Martin said as he punched me over and over. He then put his hands around my throat and started choking me. "You ruined everything," he said, squeezing so hard that my vision got darker by the second. "I'll kill you for what you've done." I raised my hands and punched Martin at the forearms as hard as I could, making his grip loosen. I then coughed up some blood in his face and kicked him away from me with the remaining strength. I turned around on my stomach and started crawling towards the gun on the ground. "No, you don't," Martin said from behind, and I felt myself getting dragged back by the feet. I turned back around to see him holding a big rock above his head. I raised my hands in defense and a loud bang ensued. Martin dropped the rock and a large red stain appeared on his chest. He stared at me in disbelief before finally falling down dead. "Rot in hell, you piece of shit," Alyssa said, holding the gun with Dewey behind her. "Come on, let's go," she said and helped me up as much as she could with her bad leg. Screams started to fill the air again behind us. We ran back inside the lab, and Andrew closed the secret passage just in time for the monsters to slam into the impregnable wall. I fell on my knees, coughing violently. When I finally stopped, I felt weaker than ever, so much that I could barely stand. I lay on the bed, while Andrew contacted HQ via radio. A few minutes later, he got a response, and the military confirmed they would eliminate the remaining monsters and perform a search and rescue immediately. "You did it," Alyssa told me as she held my hand, but I couldn't respond since I fell out of consciousness. I woke up sometime later on the same bed. Alyssa and a bunch of doctors were around me. "Good, he's stable," one of them said. "Is he going to be okay?" Alyssa asked. I looked around and saw military people talking to Andrew and more doctors walking around the lab. If we had arrived a few minutes late, he would have been dead. The doctor said, "He can never be rid of the infection, but the bacteria will remain dormant as long as he takes the medication. You'll have to keep a close eye on him. And if there's even the slightest change..." "I know. I'll take care of him," she said. The doctors left, and Alyssa sat next to me with a big smile and squeezed my hand. "Hey, you hear that? You'll be all right." I closed my eyes and squeezed back. There was no news coverage about the incident, and all rescued survivors were forced to sign an NDA about the whole deal, under the threat of incarceration and even execution. The official reported story was that there was a virus outbreak, which has since been contained, despite the numerous casualties. Months later, I live a normal life, albeit with a lower lung capacity. Dewey lives with his aunt now, but Alyssa and I make sure to visit him every week. Everyone else seems to be back to living their old mundane life too, and no one talks about the rain incident. One thing still bothers me though. Whenever it rains, I always hear something when I'm home. Something that puts me on edge and takes me back to the day when the whole incident started. Something that's always just loud enough for me to hear no matter what I'm doing or where I am in my house. The unmistakable sound of footsteps splashing in my backyard. Story number 1. It was December 31st, New Year's Eve. My friend Alex hired me to watch his dog, Bailey, for the weekend while he was out of town for the new year. I'm 35, he's 27, so I don't have that same urge to go out and party for New Year's Eve like he does. I was more okay with making some money and taking it easy for the night. New Year's Eve was on a Saturday. Alex left for the city early in the day. He'd be back Sunday night. He left me with very basic instructions. Just feed Bailey, walk her twice a day, and keep her off the furniture. Bailey is a very small husky mix. I'm not sure what else she is, but she's about a third the size of a regular husky, and she's very quiet and well-behaved. Hence, Alex was okay with me watching her instead of hiring a dog sitter. I brought a backpack with me, which contained my laptop, charger, toiletries, and a change of clothes for Sunday. Alex and I don't go way back. We met through mutual friends and had started going out occasionally on the weekends ever since. I would be sleeping in the spare bedroom of his house, on the futon. Throughout the day, I just did stuff on my laptop and played some of Alex's video games. Later in the night, I invited my girl over, with Alex's permission. His response was, "You better not in my bed," a joking way of saying yes. She could come over. Trisha, my girlfriend, said she'd be getting out of work after 12, but then she'd come straight over. Alex's house is about half an hour from us, so Trisha wouldn't be getting there until late. I had to kill time alone with Bailey, watching movies until then. We were in the living room, and Bailey was by my feet. It was probably 9 p.m. when the doorbell rang. I went to answer it, and there was a girl at the door. She looked about 30, had a hoodie on, and was holding a jacket. She introduced herself as Alex's girlfriend and said she had left something here that she needed to grab. I offered to grab it for her, but she said, "No, it's okay. I know where it is. In his room." I said, "Okay, that's fine," and let her inside. She went straight upstairs to Alex's room and slightly closed the door behind her without latching it. Right away, I texted Alex. "I didn't know you had a girlfriend." She was in Alex's room for quite some time until she came back out, still holding her jacket. She came back down the stairs, thanked me, and was heading straight for the door. I tried to stop her for a quick conversation. "How long have you guys been dating?" I asked. She replied, "Too long," then laughed as if she were making a joke. I laughed too, and then she said, "Have a good night," before leaving. I was a bit surprised by the interaction, but I gathered from it that they had probably just recently broken up. Now I started to worry that maybe I shouldn't have let her in, since Alex hadn't answered my text yet. I called him a few times before he picked up. He was out with his friends in a loud setting, so he could hardly hear me until he went outside to talk. I told him, "Your girlfriend just came by to grab something." He was completely bewildered by what I was saying. "Who are you talking about?" he asked. I responded, "She said she was your girlfriend." I didn't get a name. He yelled, "You know I don't have a girlfriend. What did she look like?" I started to feel really stupid at that moment. I described the girl, and he said he had no idea who it could have been. I then proceeded to explain to him that she went upstairs to his room for a few minutes and then came back down. That was when Alex started freaking out. He told me to go up to his room immediately and check if she had stolen anything. Of course, I didn't know what was in his room beforehand, so he had me check for specific things, all of which appeared to still be there. He tried hard to figure out who it could have been, and said he'd call me back after making some calls. He even sent me some pictures of different girls, understandably putting a damper on his night. I could tell he'd already been drinking, so I felt awfully stupid for letting some random girl into the house. Alex started sending me screenshots of different girls' Instagram accounts. None of them resembled the girl who came in. When I said no to all of them, he went silent for an hour. Then he texted me randomly, "I think I know who it was. Make sure she doesn't come back." I didn't ask any further questions. I simply responded, "Okay, my bad," and left it at that. Clearly, Alex was going through some serious girl drama, or so I thought. I watched the ball drop alone. Not that I really care about the new year or the ball drop at all. Later that night, Trisha finally made it over, and so we hung out in the living room together. I told her what happened, and she was shocked. But then, a freakish coincidence happened. Bailey lifted her head and looked at the front door, and then there was a knocking at the door. Whoever it was didn't ring the bell. There was no shot I was opening it. I called Alex a bunch of times, but he didn't pick up. He was wasted and didn't even feel his phone vibrating. Trisha and I stayed quiet, and eventually, whoever it was went away. I was honestly unnerved. Surely it was in connection to whoever that girl was earlier. Maybe it was even her again. Either way, I didn't want to get involved any further in what was going on. After this, we decided to migrate to the spare bedroom, where we'd stay for the night on the futon. We had a movie on as we laid down, and I held her. We fell asleep in this position and woke up at some unknown hour in the night, which I later found out was less than an hour after we fell asleep. I woke to Bailey's howling. She was in the room with us. Trisha woke up after me. Bailey was at the bedroom door with her tail wagging, howling. I whispered, "Bailey, shush." She looked at me and then came over, but she stayed staring at the door, now growling and making unhappy whimpering sounds. Then, there were footsteps outside on the wood floors. We heard what had to be at least 2 pairs of footsteps tiptoeing to the door, and then the doorknob twisted. By force of habit, we had the door locked, thankfully. A girl's voice said, "Alex?" I looked at Trisha and signaled for her to stay quiet. That girl was not alone. Another light tap at the door, and then the girl's voice said, "Who's in there?" "This is Alex's house," I made the decision to say, in a loud voice, almost a yell. "The cops have been on their way for a few minutes now, just so you know." The girl said, "Who are you?" I didn't bite. I whispered to Trisha to actually call the police, and she did. The entire time, she whispered into the phone. I said loud and clear, "I dare you to do something, because the time you do it, the cops will be running through the front door." I heard a whisper on the other side of the door, then multiple pairs of footsteps walking away from the door. We stayed in the room, waiting for the cops to get there. Since the front door was left wide open by those people, the cops came right in. The house was clear by this point. I gave my entire recount of the story, and then called Alex multiple times until he finally picked up, still sounding pretty drunk. One cop talked with him on the phone for a few minutes while I sat with Trisha, speaking with another cop. After all this was said and done, the accepted assumption was that there was a key in Alex's room taken by that girl from hours before. This was a pretty messy situation, since Alex couldn't just come all the way home this late. He practically begged me to stay the rest of the night. I had Trisha go home. I stayed because I felt responsible for letting that girl in the first place. I stayed locked in that room the rest of the night with Bailey. I literally wedged a chair against the front door, a half-assed attempt at keeping them out if they decided to return. By morning, though, it seemed that they didn't return. Alex came back earlier that day than originally planned. I'm not going to air out any more private information to the internet than I already have, just in case anyone who knows him can figure out this story is about him. But he did tell me who he thought the girl was, and the story behind it proves that men have to be careful too with the women they choose to interact with. That girl, and whoever was with her's intention of breaking in, wasn't to steal anything, evidently, which is the scariest part. He changed his locks ASAP. I can't even imagine staying in that house if I were him after this. However, it's been a year, and as far as I know, nothing has happened. unless he's keeping more to the story he told me a secret.
Now to the next story. Story number 2.
After returning from a night to celebrate the arrival of the new year, my husband and I returned to our apartment complex to turn in for the night. We both had a couple of drinks, but neither of us was intoxicated. As much as we enjoy partying with friends, when it comes down to it, we are really just homebodies. We lived in the corner penthouse suite of our complex. Although this was never confirmed, it was suspected the owners wanted to convert this apartment complex into condos. The rent certainly was not cheap, and access was limited to this floor. Upon entering the building, there is a walk-up, 2 secure doors, and every now and then, a doorman to greet you as you entered or exited. There were also multiple security cameras placed throughout and around the building. It was an especially cold evening, and when we returned, there was no doorman present. It was late, at least 2 a.m. The foyer was empty, and one of the lights flickered softly. My husband and I entered the elevator and pressed the button to the top floor. The elevator ride was smooth, and as we ascended, I could feel myself becoming more relaxed, excited to finally be home and able to rest. My feet were killing me from wearing heels all night in the bitter cold. The bell chimed, signaling we had reached our floor. The door slid open, and we turned the corner to the left. Like I said, our suite was the corner suite at the end of the hall. However, something caught our eye. A woman, or what at least looked like a woman, was meandering through the hallway. Her hair was dark and scattered. It looked to be matted and covered her face. She wore a black lace dress that was torn and appeared to be in bad shape. Thinking back, I don't even think she had any footwear on. We assumed she was intoxicated and was having difficulty finding her suite. Although, on closer inspection, she didn't look familiar. We knew all of our neighbors, as, like I said, access was limited on this floor. I looked at my husband, who stood still as well. I could see he was contemplating the same thoughts. I asked him, "Should we ask if she needs help?" He looked at me and said, "Just wait. Maybe she's just drunk and having a hard time finding her suite." The woman continued to slowly slide herself along the walls of the hallway, stopping at each door and peering through the exterior peepholes. Admittedly, this was creepy, but it just added to the theory that she was a drunk woman looking for her friends. She was humming, or what I believe was humming. The sound was something between a growl and a hum. We stood there in utter disbelief and awe. However, there was a veil of tension and uneasiness that lingered. The strange woman stumbled through the hallway, hunched over, until she pulled herself up to peer through the peephole of a suite. She eventually got to a suite belonging to an elderly lady with whom I have a strong connection. We'll just call her Tilly. Tilly was the sort of woman whose family had neglected her and rarely visited. She would bring my husband and me baked goods from time to time. I would bring her leftovers and assist her with groceries and medication. Frequently, Tilly's smoke alarm would go off. I would have to rush over, pull out the smoldering toast from her toaster, and fan her smoke alarm until it stopped beeping. At times, it was a nuisance, but it would always turn into tea time. Nevertheless, I cared about Tilly. So when I saw this strange woman peer into her peephole, I reacted. I blurted out, "Excuse me, are you all right?" I could feel myself lose confidence as I asked. The strange woman seemed to shudder for a moment and hunched over to the floor. She looked like she was about to puke or was frightened by my voice. My husband and I stepped closer, but the woman then let out a series of soft, menacing laughs, just barely audible. I have to admit, in this moment, I was thoroughly creeped out and reached for my cell phone. It was uncomfortable because we couldn't get to our suite without having to walk right past this deranged woman. My husband said, "Hey, Did you hear us? Do you need help? Her laugh began to grow into what was a steady cackle. The strange woman then stood up. As she stood up, her cackle became a mixture between a laugh and a boisterous growl. She then stumbled forward and continued walking down the hall. There was a staircase just outside of our suite. I assumed she was making her way to the stairs, just too embarrassed to walk past us to the elevator. Maybe she was just a drunk woman, and this was nothing more than an uncomfortable standoff with a sad and intoxicated woman. I mean, if she was really that drunk, the stairs probably weren't a good idea. We were on the 7th floor. Nevertheless, I just didn't feel like it was worth the risk to engage with this woman. I just wanted to enter my suite and dive into bed. It was late, and my feet still hurt. As we took a few steps forward, the woman stopped. Almost with laser precision, she stood up completely straight, looked right at our door, and then began to pound on it, screaming bloody murder. I could feel myself becoming swallowed with fear. I reached for my cell phone and began to dial 911. The woman kept pounding on our door and screaming. To be honest, I'm surprised none of our neighbors came out to see what was happening. Part of me thinks they were too afraid themselves and were probably peering out of their peepholes. Afraid of what our neighbors would think, my husband said, "Hey, what are you doing? Stop that." And just like that, the strange woman stopped, fell to the ground, and began crawling quickly towards us. She looked up for a brief second. All I could see were her dark eyes. Her mouth seemed to be stained black, and she was growling again. But this time it was as if there was something in her throat that she was choking on. Frozen with fear, my husband and I just watched until she flashed us a menacing hiss, the kind you would hear in a movie but never imagine in real life. Terrified, I whipped off my shoes, and my husband and I ran towards the staircase on the other side of the building. We didn't want to risk waiting for the elevator and having her catch up. We went down 2 flights of stairs and stopped to listen if she was making her way down the stairs. But it was almost impossible to hear as my heart was pounding so hard. I thought to myself, what the hell was going on? We waited there for 10 minutes or so until, eventually, we had the courage to head up the stairs and back to our suite. The woman was gone, and so we entered our suite. I was just relieved to finally be safe in my home. My husband sent a text to our landlord, and he replied that we would hear from him in the morning. I was so unbelievably exhausted but found it incredibly difficult to sleep. The sound of that woman's growling and cackling rang in my ears. I hardly slept. The next day, when my husband went to speak to the landlord, he asked him to check the security cameras. Although nothing turned up, the landlord said the cameras glitched due to the frigid temperatures last night. To this day, I still don't know what to think. That woman most certainly had problems. The question is, was she dangerous? We moved about a year later, but every New Year's Eve, I still think about that night.
Now to the next story. Story number 3.
It was New Year's Eve of 2020, and all of us were ready for this horrible year to be over. My friend Logan was throwing a house party. I arrived early to help set things up and secured a spot to sleep in his parents' room. This meant I could drive to the party, drink, and not have to worry about driving home. His parents obviously weren't home for the night. Most of our close friends in our friend group came, along with a bunch of Logan's friends who I didn't know. The party was fun. At midnight, everyone screamed "Happy New Year" and cheered their drinks. After that, people slowly started circulating out, and the party began to quiet down. Some went to other parties, bars, or home. As the night got later, it became just the closer friends staying behind. Eventually, it turned into a chill drinking session in the living room. This went on late into the night. By around 3 a.m., the last of everyone who wasn't sleeping at Logan's house had left. As it quieted down, we started hearing this occasional sound, At first, we didn't know what it was, but soon it started to sound like a creaking noise. We dismissed it as a sound from the fridge or something, which I know sounds stupid, but house appliances often make weird noises. It was just Logan, me, and Cody at this point. Cody was already falling asleep on the couch, and it was reaching that time where we were about to go to bed. However, the noise became so bothersome that we had to search for the source. We went to the kitchen, but it wasn't coming from there. Then, we realized the sound was coming from near the basement door. Logan opened the door, and we immediately heard the creaking sound more clearly. "Go check what it is," I said. He kept saying, "Oh, no way," and then called down into the basement, "Yo, who's down there?" The creaking stopped. We waited at the top of the stairs for a solid minute, but nothing happened. Finally, we agreed to go down together. Both of us grabbed knives, drunkenly thinking that was a good idea, though in reality, we were so drunk, we'd probably only hurt ourselves with them. At the bottom of the stairs, we looked around the entire basement. It wasn't huge, just a couch, TV, bar, table in the corner, and various old pieces of junk. It was pretty messy at the time. The first thing we did was search every possible crevice for someone who could be hiding. Then, we tried to figure out what could have been making that sound. That's when I noticed a rocking chair. I walked up to it, sat in it, and started rocking. It made the exact same creaking sound we had been hearing. Logan and I looked at each other. I stood up, and every hair on my body stood up as well. I don't think we ever ran faster than we did when we bolted up those stairs and slammed the door shut. We tried to come up with any logical explanation, but there was none. Logan kept the basement door locked for days until his parents came back. There was no living soul down there, but something was moving that rocking chair. That chair had belonged to his grandma, who passed away a long time ago. His mom had kept it for sentimental reasons. I can't say I've ever experienced anything resembling the paranormal before this, nor have I since then. It still sends chills down my spine.